Hi everyone. Today, I'd like to talk about a little show you may have heard of called SpongeBob SquarePants. Now I know what you're thinking. Wow, a YouTube video about SpongeBob? That's such an original idea that totally hasn't been done to death. But sarcasm aside, while I know that there are plenty of SpongeBob videos out there, I still wanted to make this as SpongeBob means a lot to me personally. Plus it'll be a nice change of pace to make a video that isn't Disney or Nintendo related. I was born in 1998. Less than a year before the first SpongeBob episode aired, so I really don't remember a time when it wasn't part of my life. Some of my earliest memories involve watching this show, and I even remember seeing the first movie in theaters when I was just 6 years old. The first 3 seasons are some of my favorite pieces of television, and I never get tired of watching them. It also happens to be SpongeBob's 25th anniversary this year, so I think it's the perfect time to pay tribute to such a legendary cartoon. But of course, I'm only going to be discussing episodes from the first 3 seasons, before the first movie, which many fans, including myself, consider to be the show's golden age. It's no secret that SpongeBob sort of went downhill in quality after the first movie, though I will say that not every episode from that period was bad. In fact, there are quite a few that are actually pretty good, including the ones after the second movie, which, on average, are much better than the ones from in between the first 2 films. I haven't seen any of the spin-off shows either, but in my opinion, nothing can quite recapture the magic of those first 3 seasons, which had the perfect combination of lovable characters, creative visuals, and of course, hilarious writing. And today, I'm going to be ranking these episodes from worst to best. Keep in mind that this is in no way a definitive ranking of this part of the show, as it's purely my opinion, but I just thought it would be fun to share my thoughts on each episode. So, without further ado, let's dive in and look at this iconic series. We're starting off with my least favorite classic episode, and this may be a bit of a controversial choice as a lot of fans seem to like this one, Rock Bottom from Season 1. Before I get into my actual thoughts though, let me clarify something. Keep in mind that just because an episode is low on the list doesn't mean I think it's terrible or anything. In fact, I don't think there's a single bad episode in the entire first 3 seasons of SpongeBob. But that also doesn't mean that every episode is a masterpiece. In fact, you may notice that most of the lower ranked episodes are from the first season, and I think that on average it isn't quite as good as seasons 2 or 3. Again, it's still great, but it is the weakest of the 3 seasons. So I guess it's appropriate that my least favorite episode comes from this season. And it's even more appropriate that it's literally called Rock Bottom. Like I said, there's no bad classic SpongeBob episode, and this one is no exception, but I still don't like it that much. The episode starts with SpongeBob and Patrick riding the bus home from the amusement park Love World. But because of a mix-up, they end up at a creepy, seedy town called Rock Bottom. Patrick ends up leaving SpongeBob by himself, so he has to find his way home. Let me start by saying that there are plenty of things to enjoy in this episode. The designs of the Rock Bottom residents are really creative, and are generally scarier looking than the Bikini Bottom residents. There's also plenty of funny moments. My favorite is SpongeBob's line,
"This isn't your average everyday darkness. This is advanced darkness."
By the way, a lot of this video is just going to be me listing the funniest moments from these episodes, so apologies for that in advance. But now let's get to what I don't like about the episode, which is how surprisingly bleak the story feels. Rock Bottom is such a dark, scary place, and you just feel so bad for SpongeBob and want him to get home. It doesn't help that the Rock Bottom residents are already rude to SpongeBob for seemingly no reason. I just don't like seeing SpongeBob in such a helpless situation. I don't find it funny or entertaining to watch. It does end on a pretty happy note, of course, but it doesn't really make up for everything that happened before. So this may just come down to my personal taste rather than any actual flaws with the episode, but out of all the classic episodes, this has always been the one I've had the hardest time getting through. The next entry is interesting as it's actually the very second episode of the entire series, Reef Blower. The premise of the episode is simple. SpongeBob gets out his leaf blower and inadvertently annoys Squidward with it. This is a really weird one because it's the only SpongeBob episode I know of that has no audible dialogue, which I think is one of the main reasons why I'm not a huge fan of it. I've never been able to get into these types of cartoons where the characters don't speak and the comedy is entirely made up of slapstick. It's the same reason why I'm not a huge Tom and Jerry fan. As this was one of the first episodes of the show, the writers were probably still getting a feel for its tone and style of humor, which may explain why this episode feels a bit off. The comedy is still pretty good, and since this is one of the shortest SpongeBob episodes, it definitely doesn't overstay its welcome, but it's still not very remarkable. Yeah, not much to say here, just kind of a forgettable episode. Up next is another mostly forgettable episode from Season 1, Neptune's Spatula. In this episode, SpongeBob pulls out King Neptune's golden spatula while at the Fry Cook Hall of Fame, leading Neptune to challenge him to a cooking duel. Probably the most noteworthy aspect of this episode is that it features the first appearance of King Neptune, who would make more appearances throughout the rest of the series and even the movies, though his design and voice would fluctuate over the years. In this episode, Neptune is voiced by special guest star John O'Hurley, probably best known as Elaine's boss on Seinfeld. His performance is definitely a major highlight of the episode, giving Neptune a brash, egotistical quality.
You shall be tested with a challenge!
Bring it on! SpongeBob can handle it! Ouch!
But outside of that, there's not a ton of memorable stuff in this episode. As always, the humor is pretty good, but the only joke that stands out to me is Tom Kenny's cameo as the guy in the shower. Though there's also this good line from Neptune that has since become a pretty popular meme.
It is even funnier the second time!
But yeah, once again, there's not a ton to say about this episode. Not bad, but definitely not one of the more memorable ones from the classic era. And what do you know, next up is another Season 1 episode, The Chaperone. See what I mean? Lots of Season 1 episodes in the lower half of the list. This is one of the earliest appearances of Mr. Krabs' daughter, Pearl, who in this episode is forced to bring SpongeBob along as he date to the prom. This is one of those episodes that makes you realize how unclear the show is about SpongeBob's age. I mean, if he's a teenager like Pearl, there's nothing wrong with him going with her, but I've always assumed SpongeBob is a young adult, which makes the premise of this episode a little weird. But outside of that, there's still quite a few fun moments in the episode. I love how all Pearl's friends are those anchovy guys that only speak in meep.
I'd like you to meet Billy Fishkins.
Meep,
And you know Brian Flounder from math class.
meep.
And the song Doing the Sponge during the dance scene is surprisingly really catchy.
Well, if you take your leg and you stick it in the air, and then you take the other one and jam it right up there, you twist yourself around and give a great big lunge. Now you're doing the sponge.
Though there's also this weird running gag where SpongeBob keeps replacing himself with a lookalike dummy, which even comes back at the very end of the episode, and maybe it's just me, but I've never really understood this joke. Does anyone else have this problem, or am I just stupid? If you get this joke, please let me know in the comments. But overall, not a bad episode by any means, but still one of the more forgettable ones from the first season. Next up is another Season 1 episode, but a bit more unique than the ones we've talked about, Scaredy Pants. In theory, this should be one of my favorite episodes because it was the very first Halloween episode in the show, and Halloween is one of my favorite holidays. And yeah, it is still pretty good, and definitely gets me in the Halloween spirit whenever I watch it, but I wouldn't say I love this episode. Let's start by talking about the positives, and a big one for me is how this episode captures the Halloween atmosphere. From the spooky lighting to all the Halloween costumes and decorations, the animators did a really good job capturing the whole Halloween vibe. There's also a few funny moments, including Squidward's line,
I've come for your pickle.
and this exchange between Squidward and Sandy at the Halloween party that honestly took me a long time to get.
Why, I'm a pet goldfish in a bowl.
I don't get it.
This episode also features the first proper appearance of the Flying Dutchman, who was previously mentioned in another episode we'll get to later, but this was the first time we actually heard him speak through Brian Doyle Murray's great voice performance.
But that's not the reason I'm taking your souls. No, this is the straw that broke the camel's back.
But outside of these moments, I don't really think this one stands out as much as the other classic episodes. Sure, there are a few funny moments, but most of the comedy isn't really on par with the other episodes. But even though it's not one of my favorites, I still look forward to watching this episode every year around Halloween. And next up is actually the episode that directly followed Scaredy Pants, I Was a Teenage Gary. Since this was paired with the Halloween episode, it does have a bit of a spooky theme, even though it's not specifically about Halloween. In this episode, SpongeBob and Patrick go to a jellyfish convention for the weekend, so SpongeBob gets Squidward to watch Gary. Of course, Squidward quickly forgets about the snail, causing Gary to get sick, so SpongeBob calls the vet to help him. Somehow, Squidward accidentally injects SpongeBob with snail plasma that was meant for Gary, causing SpongeBob to turn into a snail. This is a really creative premise for a horror-themed episode, and overall I find it much more memorable than the previous one. Honestly, the main reason this episode is a bit low on the list is because of the scene where SpongeBob turns into a snail. This scene always creeped the hell out of me when I was a kid, so growing up I never looked forward to watching it.
I take it back, Gary. Something is wrong with me. Ow.
I definitely enjoy it more now that I'm older, but it's still not one of my favorites from Season 1. However, there are some pretty funny moments throughout the episode, especially the end where Squidward also turns into a snail.
Will you clam up?
So overall, it's not a great episode, but still an improvement over the last one we looked at. Next is yet another Season 1 episode, Suds. This is another one that I don't really have a lot to say about. In this episode, SpongeBob comes down with the suds, which is basically the sponge equivalent of a cold or the flu, leading Patrick to unsuccessfully cure him. This is one of those episodes that I think really takes good advantage of the fact that SpongeBob is, well, a sponge, which I don't think we really get enough of in the series. The animation plays a lot with how SpongeBob's condition affects himself and his environment, leading to a really creative climax. But my favorite part is at the end of the episode, when SpongeBob finally goes to the doctor and is cured through live-action footage of himself actually being used as a sponge. I love moments like this in the show where they use live-action footage for comedic effect. And once again, this scene really plays into SpongeBob actually being a sponge.
Woo! Yeah! Woo! Ah! This tickles!
Outside of that though, there aren't really a ton of memorable or hilarious moments. But as far as Season 1 episodes go, this is a pretty decent one. And what do you know, next up is the episode that was paired with Suds, Sleepy Time. I'm sensing a bit of a pattern here. Out of all the Season 1 episodes, this one has probably some of the most creative visuals. The whole episode revolves around SpongeBob visiting the dreams of his friends like Patrick, Sandy, Squidward, and Mr. Krabs. Each dream reflects the respective character's personality in really creative ways, including Mr. Krabs fishing for a giant dollar during a storm, and Patrick just riding on a rocking horse in an empty void.
Shoot, that was my last quarter.
You can tell that by this point the writers were really starting to nail the characters' personalities. This is one of the rare episodes that features most, if not all, of the recurring characters, and each one manages to be pretty well written. My favorite dream of the episode is probably Gary's, where he sees himself as a genius in a huge library.
There once was a man from Peru who dreamed he was eating his shoe. He awoke with a fright in the middle of the night to find that his dream had come true.
While this episode once again doesn't have a lot of laugh-out-loud funny moments, it is one that really revolves around the characters' personalities and relationships, which I always appreciate. Now we finally move away from the first season and into Season 3, with the first double-length episode on our list, SpongeBob's House Party, also known as Party Pooper Pants. Yeah, I don't know why, but a lot of these double-length episodes have two titles. Out of all the classic episodes, this is one of the few that I don't remember airing super often, so I don't exactly have it memorized like a lot of other classic episodes. And maybe it's for a good reason, because while this isn't a bad episode by any means, it is my least favorite outside of the first season. The main problem is that there isn't really a lot of tension in the episode. SpongeBob holds a big party in his house, but it ends up being too boring, so everyone kicks him out. It's unclear who exactly we're supposed to be rooting for. Sure, SpongeBob comes off as a control freak, wanting everything to go his way, but the partygoers also come off as a bit harsh towards him and end up kinda trashing his house. And once again, there aren't a ton of really funny moments, especially compared to other Season 3 episodes, although Patrick's dance at the party always makes me laugh. Thankfully, the Patchy segments are a bit better, which have a similar premise of Patchy trying to throw a big party, with Potty ending up taking it over. The big highlight of these segments is the song Underwater Sun, which honestly really slaps.
Down, down, down. Ah, we'll have lots of fun. You and me forever in the underwater sun.
The song was performed by the late Lux Interior, who was the lead singer of the Cramps, who you probably know best for this song.
You better die when I show up.
He was also from my hometown, so I have a deep appreciation for him. Anyways, Party Pooper Pants is a decent episode, but not as worth remembering as the others from Season 3. Up next is another double-length episode from Season 3, The Sponge Who Could Fly. This one has a really clever premise. It's presented by Patchy as a lost episode of the show, and it deals with SpongeBob trying to learn how to fly with the jellyfish. Eventually, SpongeBob inflates his pants, which leads him to using them to help Bikini Bottom and sort of become a superhero. This episode also stands out as the only one from the classic era to be an actual musical. Other episodes have musical numbers as well, but never this many at once. And yeah, the songs are mostly pretty good, with my favorite one probably being He's Flying.
He's flying, he's flying, he's really, really flying. They laughed, they scoffed,
before I had liftoff.
But now he's flying high in the sky.
The Patchy segments are also really memorable. I especially love that walk cycle Patchy watches thinking it's the last episode, which leads him to having a total breakdown.
I'm sorry I ever started this stupid fan club in the first place. I'm gonna get rid of all my SpongeBob stuff. All of it.
The episode itself also has plenty of funny moments, especially the running gag with Old Man Jenkins.
I knew no good would come from city folk and their flying machines.
But what really brings this episode down for me is how the residents of Bikini Bottom treat SpongeBob. They end up taking advantage of his powers to do trivial tasks, and when SpongeBob finally objects, they end up forming an angry mob against him and destroying his magic pants. This wouldn't be so bad except the residents don't really learn their lesson, and seem to feel more bad about losing the pants than SpongeBob himself.
I think a proper burial is in order. A pair of pants like these come around once in a lifetime.
If it wasn't for the funny moments and musical numbers, this would probably be my least favorite episode of Season 3. But thankfully, there's just enough good stuff for me to call this a decent episode. Now we return to the first season with Sandy's Rocket. This is another Season 1 episode where there honestly isn't a lot to say about it. In this one, Sandy invites SpongeBob to go with her to the moon, but he and Patrick end up accidentally launching the rocket without her, leading them to mistakenly believe that they're on the moon. This episode is interesting as it's probably the first one to establish Sandy as a scientific genius, which later episodes would lean much harder into. It also contains the first appearance of Flats, although here he's just a nameless background character. The episode itself has a fun premise that really plays into SpongeBob and Patrick's stupidity, but once again there just aren't enough funny moments to make me really invested. There's also that really dark joke at the beginning that seems to imply that SpongeBob accidentally killed a bunch of people, which just doesn't sit right with me.
Especially after your little mishap with my whirly-bird.
So overall, not a bad episode by any means, but like a lot of the first season, it's not that memorable either. Up next is the episode with the very first appearance of Mrs. Puff, Boating School. This is an episode whose importance in the show outweighs its actual quality. Not only was this Mrs. Puff's first appearance, but it also established the subplot of SpongeBob trying and failing to get his boating license. The episode quickly sets up SpongeBob and Mrs. Puff's dynamic. SpongeBob's antics often give Mrs. Puff a lot of anxiety, but you can also tell that she genuinely cares about SpongeBob. There's also plenty of funny moments, most of which come from Patrick as he inadvertently helps SpongeBob cheat on his driving test. I especially love this random outburst from him right before the test starts.
Testing! Testing, 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 testing! Testing! Ah! Do you read?
There's also a recurring line from Mrs. Puff that my dad used to quote all the time.
Oh, SpongeBob! Why?
There's not a ton to remember from this episode outside of these moments, but it's still a fun time and played an important role in the series. Our next episode is another important one from the first season, Plankton. This one is arguably even more important than the previous one because, as the title suggests, it's the one that introduced Plankton. And I must say, the character gave us a really good first impression. Plankton's selfish and maniacal personality is evident right away, and Doug Lawrence's iconic voice performance makes him even funnier to watch.
I went to college!
There's plenty of classic jokes here, with some highlights including the running gag of Plankton using the record player, this line for when Plankton takes control of SpongeBob's brain,
Shut your mouth, you mediocre clarinet player.
Mediocre?
and this dumb little joke that cracks me up every time.
This is my lab. And this is my laboratory!
In addition to Plankton, we're also introduced to his computer wife, Karen. Though at this point she hasn't really developed her personality and just acts like a regular computer.
Seaweed. 50% sea, 50% weed.
This episode may not be a laugh riot like the later episodes on this list, but it does a great job of introducing one of SpongeBob's most prominent characters. Next up is, surprise surprise, another Season 1 episode, Jellyfish Jam. What sticks out about this episode for me though, is how I used to watch it as a kid. Remember GBA Video? You know, those Game Boy Advance cartridges that let you watch movies or TV show episodes in really, really low quality? Well, I had a few of those as a kid, and one of them was a collection of 4 SpongeBob episodes from the first season. And one of the episodes on that cartridge was Jellyfish Jam. So this is an episode that I remember particularly well. But besides that, a lot of this episode just doesn't really stick out to me. It's pretty fun seeing how SpongeBob deals with the partying jellyfish that invade his house, and I fucking love this moment.
Wait, would it be possible to play your clarinet a little better? I don't think the jellyfish like it.
There's also some surprisingly really catchy music, most notably the electronic music SpongeBob and the jellyfish dance to, and the song at the very end. While these moments definitely stand out, the rest of the episode shares a lot of the same problems as before, with not a lot of super funny moments, and a somewhat boring plot. But, as usual, there's still plenty to enjoy here. Up next is Muscle Bob Buff Pants from, you guessed it, Season 1. From the very first episode of the series, the show made it clear that SpongeBob doesn't exactly have a lot of muscle. And this is one of the few that really takes advantage of that character trait. The whole episode is about SpongeBob trying to impress Sandy by buying anchor arms, which make the wearer look super strong. The anchor arms commercial at the beginning is probably the most memorable part of the episode for me. It does an amazing job of parodying cheesy infomercials.
I was a wimp before Anchor Arms. Now I'm a jerk and everybody loves me.
I also like the moments that show how weak SpongeBob actually is. Like how he apparently can't even hold a glass. His lives throughout the episode culminate in him trying a weightlifting contest, which goes about as well as you'd expect in another really funny scene. But while this episode has some really funny and memorable moments, in my opinion, the basic premise of SpongeBob trying to impress Sandy in a way that ends up backfiring was already done much better in an earlier episode, which I'll get to later. But on its own, this episode is always fun to return to. We're taking another break from Season 1 to look at the first Season 2 episode on this list, Grandma's Kisses. This episode features the very first appearance of SpongeBob's grandma, voiced wonderfully by Marion Ross of Happy Days fame, who would make several more appearances in the show's later years.
Come in and sit for a while. Have a cookie, SpongeBob.
The episode centers on SpongeBob feeling embarrassed by how much his grandma babies him, so with the help of Patrick, he tries to act more adult. But at the end, he realizes that being an adult has its downsides, and that he kind of likes being treated as a kid. This theme honestly hits much harder for me as an adult. There are plenty of times when I feel exhausted by all the responsibilities of adulthood, and just want to go back to being a kid. So SpongeBob's struggle here is really relatable to me. But while this episode has a lot of heart compared to others in this series, there aren't a ton of funny moments that stick out to me. The one I always remember is when everyone is making fun of SpongeBob at the Krusty Krab, and that one guy just goes way too far with his insults.
He sucks his thumb, and plays with dolls, and wears pajamas with feet in him, and carries his blankie around, and
all right already!
I also like the brief scene of SpongeBob and Patrick listening to freeform jazz. So yeah, this is yet another episode that may not have the strongest comedy, but it does have a really heartwarming story. Up next is another Season 2 episode, I'm with Stupid. Out of all the classic episodes, this is one of the least liked among fans. In fact, some of you watching might be surprised that I didn't put it lower on the list. The episode starts with Patrick in a panic because his parents are about to visit him, and he doesn't want them to think he's stupid. So SpongeBob tries to help by acting even stupider in front of his parents, but this leads to Patrick treating SpongeBob like he really is dumb. This leads to my biggest problem with the episode. Patrick acts way too mean towards SpongeBob for no real reason, and it just kind of comes out of nowhere. In fact, you could argue that this episode started the trend of Patrick being a bad friend to SpongeBob, which would only get worse in the post-movie episodes. I wouldn't mind this so much, except that the episode has no real resolution. Instead, SpongeBob just sort of gives up at the end and goes home, and no one really learns anything. But for me, what really saves this episode is the comedy. There are so many hilarious moments here, especially the whole letter-note exchange at the beginning.
Hey, a note!
Yeah, but turn it over! There's a letter!
You're right.
And I also love the twist at the end that Patrick's parents in the episode aren't even his real parents.
Oh, that's right, honey. We don't have a son.
Oh, yeah.
This is the kind of random humor that SpongeBob did exceptionally well during this era. So overall, this episode is kind of a mixed bag. While it's weighed down by a weak story with no real resolution, it makes up for it with some hilarious comedy. Now we're finally getting into the top 100, starting with another Season 1 episode, Squidward the Unfriendly Ghost. This one has a really fun premise in which SpongeBob and Patrick mistakenly think they've killed Squidward after they ruin his wax figure of himself. As a side note, this is surprisingly not the only episode where SpongeBob thinks he committed a major crime, or even the only one where he thinks he killed someone. Anyways, instead of setting the record straight, Squidward decides to mess with SpongeBob and Patrick by pretending to be a ghost and making them do whatever he wants. After so many episodes of SpongeBob and Patrick making Squidward's life a living hell, it's nice to see him get some payback. But of course, he doesn't get away with it in the end, with SpongeBob and Patrick going to really funny lengths to give Squidward a proper burial.
Okay, get in.
This leads to some of the darkest jokes in this era of SpongeBob, which I've always thought the show did really well without going too far. I also like the reference to Too Loose on the Track, which is one of those jokes which I didn't get until I was much older.
Here?
Too loose, la track.
Oh, and remember when I said that Scaredy Pants wasn't the Flying Dutchman's first appearance? Well, it was actually in this episode, except he doesn't have any spoken dialogue. Overall, this is a pretty solid episode. Not one of the most memorable in the series, but it has a fun premise that it takes good advantage of. Up next is another Season 1 episode, ARG, which has to be one of my favorite titles of this season. This episode starts with the board game SpongeBob and Patrick are playing called The Flying Dutchman's Treasure Hunt, which as a side note actually looks like a really fun game, and apparently it was recently turned into a real board game. Mr. Krabs joins in on the game but gets way too involved, which leads to probably the funniest moment in the entire episode for me.
Rev up those fryers, cause I am sure hungry for one. Help! Help! My leg!
There's also this exchange between Mr. Krabs and Patrick that never fails to make me laugh.
Patrick, you're fired. But I don't even work here. Would you like the job starting now? Boy, would I. You're fired.
This is one of the few times when SpongeBob actually gets annoyed at Mr. Krabs, since he quickly gets tired of the game. This is a dynamic I wish we could get more of, and it leads to another pretty funny moment.
Mr. Krabs, I wanna go to bed!
Anyways, Mr. Krabs decides to take SpongeBob and Patrick on a real treasure hunt, before they discover that the map Mr. Krabs was using is actually just the game board. Yeah, this episode has a crazy story, but I've always liked these episodes where Mr. Krabs goes a little insane. However, the basic idea of Mr. Krabs taking a fun activity way too far would be done much better in a later episode we'll get to in a bit. But overall, ARG is a crazy and really funny episode to return to. Next, we'll be taking a look at none other than the very first episode of the entire show, Help Wanted. Yep, this is the one that started it all, and it leaves a great first impression. This is the episode where we see SpongeBob get his job at the Krusty Krab, along with introducing characters like Patrick, Squidward, and Mr. Krabs. Right away, the characters' personalities and relationships are so well written, and make the comedy even better. Speaking of the comedy, apparently when Steven Hellenberg and his crew pitched this episode to Nick for the first time, the executives were laughing so hard that they had to leave the room. And I can see why. While this isn't the funniest episode of the series, there are still plenty of great moments, with the most memorable scene for me being when the anchovies are introduced.
A kind of smelly smell. A smelly smell that smells smelly. Anchovies.
Why?
Anchovies!
And of course, there's also that memorable ending featuring Living in the Sunlight by Tiny Tim. One of the few times SpongeBob used a licensed song, which also unfortunately means that the song was removed in some home video releases. Overall, this is a solid way to start a legendary series. Next up is one of the first holiday-themed episodes of SpongeBob, Valentine's Day. As a kid, I would always look forward to this episode airing every year, and to this day it's an annual tradition for me to watch it on Valentine's Day. Because of that, this episode has a special place in my heart, even though it's not one of the strongest from the first season. The episode is about SpongeBob trying to surprise Patrick with a chocolate hot air balloon at the Valentine's Day carnival. As a side note, this carnival looks like a lot of fun, and I've always wanted to go there. It's also one of the only times we get to see the Bikini Bottom Pier, which is a really cool location. Anyways, when Sandy is flying the balloon to the carnival, she gets attacked by scallops, leading SpongeBob to cancel his plans and give Patrick a handshake instead. This leads to easily my favorite part of the episode. It's so funny to see Patrick go from being slightly angry to going absolutely insane and destroying everything at the carnival.
I defy you, Heartman!
But thankfully, Sandy manages to bring the balloon in time, which is immediately followed by quite possibly my favorite joke in the episode.
You must think I'm pretty dumb, huh?
Yes! Turn around!
What makes this episode so fun for me is how it goes from being really pleasant and laid back in the first half to going completely crazy once Patrick goes on his rampage. It's always fun for me to return to, not only because it's so funny, but also because of the special tradition it spawned for me. Since we just talked about the Valentine's Day episode, it's fitting that our next one is the episode that directly follows it, The Paper. While not one of the funniest episodes in this series, or even season 1, it is one of the best examples of SpongeBob and Squidward's relationship. It has a deceptively simple premise in which Squidward gives a piece of scrap paper to SpongeBob, who uses it in increasingly creative ways. Squidward gradually becomes more jealous of SpongeBob as he keeps having fun with the paper. The episode makes so much out of this simple premise by having Squidward go to extreme lengths to get the paper, eventually ending with him giving up pretty much all of his possessions. This reveals a key aspect of Squidward's character. As much as he acts like he's above SpongeBob's antics, he secretly wants the same sense of fun and optimism as him, an idea that would be explored even better in future episodes. But this one is still worth watching for its great jokes and characterization.
I am such an idiot.
Next we'll be looking at another holiday-themed episode, Fools in April. Like Valentine's Day, it's become a tradition for me to watch this episode every year on April Fool's Day. And as far as I'm concerned, it's basically the only highlight of that day, as I mostly find it to be really annoying. So in a way, I actually kind of relate to Squidward in this episode, who becomes fed up with SpongeBob's constant April Fool's pranks and decides to get back at him. Though admittedly, Squidward goes way too far with this prank, leading him to try to apologize to SpongeBob, which is easier said than done. Like the last episode we looked at, this is another one where we can see that Squidward secretly has a soft spot for SpongeBob. In fact, Squidward straight up admits to liking SpongeBob in an ending that's equally heartwarming and funny.
I didn't mean to hurt you. In fact, SpongeBob, I like you. I like living next door. I like hearing your foghorn alarm in the morning and your high-pitched giggling at night. I also like Gary, Patrick, Sandy, Mr. Krabs, and all the other people I'm forced to be in contact with.
Speaking of which, there is some pretty good comedy in this episode. The moment that sticks out to me is when that one customer freaks out when he thinks SpongeBob did something to his drink.
What did you do to my drink?
You what?
You asked for a couple of ice cubes in your drink, and I only put in one!
There's also some really funny and creative facial expressions, mostly from Squidward. Seriously, the storyboard artists really went all out with this one. Overall, this is an episode I look forward to watching every year with its perfect balance of comedy and heart. Next is another Season 1 episode, Hooky, which always reminds me of my dad. He really liked this episode because he was an avid fisherman, and this episode's premise definitely deals with that sport. The story goes into how the residents of Bikini Bottom react to people trying to fish for them, which they almost treat as being like UFOs or something. The episode also weirdly works as an allegory for addiction and peer pressure, as Patrick convinces SpongeBob that the hooks aren't actually that bad despite Mr. Krabs' warnings.
SpongeBob, let me ask you something. Does this look dangerous?
This is another episode that may not have a ton of big laughs, but makes up for it with a really creative and clever premise. The idea to show how the SpongeBob characters deal with fish hooks is full of potential, and this episode takes great advantage of that potential. Now we'll take another break from the first season to look at a Season 3 episode, The Great Snail Race. This episode starts with Squidward entering his new snail into a race, which makes SpongeBob jealous and causes him to enter Gary into the same race. Though unfortunately, SpongeBob pushes Gary a little too hard. This leads to probably my biggest problem with the episode, and the reason why it's a bit lower on my list, which is that SpongeBob just feels really out of character here. He's usually such a kind, fun-loving character, and when he does reach his breaking point, it's usually for good reason. But here, SpongeBob being so competitive with Squidward or treating Gary so harshly just doesn't seem in line with his personality. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I always thought SpongeBob felt a bit off in this episode. On the bright side though, the episode is made a lot better by its great comedy. I love the running gag of people getting Squidward's last name wrong.
Property of Squidward, tent poles.
That's tennis ball! Tentacles!
and Sandy getting offended by a comment SpongeBob makes, which has the perfect payoff at the end.
I don't know why, but I think I'll kick SpongeBob's butt tomorrow. That's for yesterday, SquarePants!
So despite this episode feeling a bit more mean-spirited than usual, it does have some really funny moments that keep it from being bad. Now we move on to a Season 2 episode, The Secret Box. This is another episode with a deceptively simple premise. Patrick has a secret box and SpongeBob wants to know what's inside it. While this doesn't seem like a big deal, SpongeBob's attempts to open the box and Patrick's refusal to let him puts a strain on their friendship. This helps give the episode a bit more emotional weight than the series usually has. As far as the humor goes, there aren't quite as many hilarious moments as other episodes, but there are a few great jokes. I love the visual gag of Squidward's house listening in on SpongeBob and Patrick, and the visual of Patrick's mind.
The inner machinations of my mind are an enigma.
And of course, there's the big reveal that the item inside the secret box is actually
one embarrassing snapshot of SpongeBob at the Christmas party! Merry Christmas, SpongeBob!
I think the fact that we never actually see the photo only adds to the mystery and humor of the ending. Overall, this is a pretty solid episode, though admittedly it pales in comparison to the one it was paired with, which we'll look at much later in the list. And now we once again return to Season 1 with Home Sweet Pineapple. This one is noteworthy of being the first of many appearances of SpongeBob's parents. While they're not exactly the strongest or most memorable characters in the show, they're still an important part of it, so it's cool to see them for the first time here. Anyways, this episode starts with a bunch of nematodes eating SpongeBob's entire house, leading to a line that always makes me laugh for some reason.
Hooray, Gary! We're finally huge!
As a side note, how many people actually knew what nematodes were even before they watched this episode? I mean, this was the first time I ever heard of them. I guess it's just another example of Steve Hunenberg flexing his marine biology skills.
Oh, dang nematodes!
Anyways, with his house gone, SpongeBob tries to rebuild it with Patrick. But in a sequence with some really clever visual gags, they accidentally build it too small. SpongeBob then tries moving in with Patrick, but in another funny sequence, he finds he can't sleep around him.
Spiders! Spiders! Get them off me! Get them off me! Get them off me!
Wake up! It's me!
After unsuccessfully trying to move in with Squidward, SpongeBob almost gives up before he miraculously gets a new house exactly like his old one after planting a seed. I've always wondered if this means SpongeBob's house in the rest of the series is technically a different one from the original, even though they both look exactly the same. But overall, this episode definitely has some funny and memorable moments, but like many Season 1 episodes, it doesn't quite stand out from the rest. Up next is Hall Monitor from Season 1. This is another episode that was on that GBA video compilation I watched as a kid, so once again I have fond memories of this one. This episode centers on Mrs. Puff's boating school, and I've always found it funny how it functions like a regular school with lockers, lunch breaks, and in this case hall monitors. As the episode title suggests, SpongeBob is selected as the hall monitor of the day, and as usual, he goes way overboard with his commitment. It's so funny to see SpongeBob try to act like he knows what he's doing, when in reality he's just causing chaos everywhere he goes. He even brings Patrick in as a sidekick of sorts, which leads to even more hilarious moments. In fact, there's a couple scenes with Patrick that have since become pretty popular memes, especially the line,
"He's just standing there, menacingly!"
And the part where he talks to the police officers about the maniac, aka SpongeBob, which is just so funny from beginning to end.
Calm down, son. It's just a drawing, not the real thing.
Patrick's moments really are the highlights of the episode, but everything else is still pretty fun. Now, I've always thought it was a bit unfair that Mrs. Puff was the one who got sent to jail at the end instead of SpongeBob. Sure, Mrs. Puff admitted to being somewhat responsible for SpongeBob's actions, but SpongeBob was the one who actually caused all the problems in the city. But outside of that, this is a pretty fun episode all around. Now we return to the second season with Your Shoes Untied. In this episode, SpongeBob tries to teach Patrick how to tie his shoes, only to discover that he's forgotten how to tie them. This seems like a really simple premise, but it does lead to some pretty funny moments as SpongeBob first tries to hide his problem from everyone, before struggling to find someone who can help him tie his shoes. When you think about it, SpongeBob is really the only character in the show who wears shoes with laces. I guess maybe Sandy or his parents could have helped him, but even then I'm not 100% sure. Anyways, while this episode is pretty fun overall, the most memorable part for me is at the end when Gary ends up helping SpongeBob with this problem by playing the song Loop De Loop by Ween.
You make a loop-de-loop and pull, and your shoes are looking cool.
The song is inescapably catchy and it stuck with me throughout my entire childhood. Though I'm not sure how much it actually helped me learn how to tie my shoes. Actually, that's a good question. Did anyone actually learn how to tie their shoes from the song? If any of you did, please let me know in the comments. But yeah, there's not a lot to say about this episode. It's not the most memorable one from this era, but it's still pretty fun. Next up is another Season 2 episode, Bossy Boots. This one sees Pearl trying to rebrand the Krusty Krab with SpongeBob's help. Everything seems to go well at first, until Pearl starts to go a little overboard and changes too much about the restaurant for SpongeBob's liking. I think the funniest part of the episode for me is when SpongeBob and Pearl are tossing around ideas for the rebrand, and SpongeBob's ideas just get progressively darker.
The curly crab! The creepy crab! The killer crab!
No.
I also like the way SpongeBob pronounces salad here, and to this day I often think about that every time I have a salad.
But what in the name of Davy Jones's locker is a salad? Here you go, 2 salads.
Once again, this episode also has a memorable song, which is known simply as the Bossy Boots song, performed by the Capsules. We only hear a little bit of it in the background in one scene, but the whole song is available on the Yellow album, and I highly recommend it. It has a very childlike but also melancholy tone that I just find to be so beautiful. But outside of those, this isn't one of the most memorable classic episodes, but I still like revisiting it from time to time. It also sort of pales in comparison to the episode it was paired up with, but we'll get to that one later. Next up is Dumped, once again from the second season. As weird as it sounds, this is one of the saddest episodes from the classic era. The episode centers around Gary, who seemingly out of nowhere starts to prefer Patrick over SpongeBob, leaving SpongeBob feeling really lonely and depressed. I think this is the main reason why this episode is a bit lower on the list. It's just really depressing to see SpongeBob struggle without Gary around. That being said, there are still some pretty funny moments here. The part that always sticks out to me is when SpongeBob is trying to replace Gary, and one of them is just a photorealistic snail.
And Gary and Larry are real different than Jerry.
And of course, the episode has a happy ending where it turns out that Gary only wanted a cookie in Patrick's pocket. Come on, did you really think that Gary would just leave SpongeBob forever? Cause that would be stupid. Here comes yet another Season 2 episode, Bubble Buddy. In this one, SpongeBob makes a new friend out of bubbles named, well, Bubble Buddy. At first, this imaginary friend seems innocent enough, until SpongeBob starts using him to inadvertently cause trouble for everyone. I think my only major critique of this episode is that it feels just a bit too mean-spirited. On the one hand, it obviously makes sense why the Bikini Bottom residents would be so mad at SpongeBob and Bubble Buddy. But on the other hand, I can't help but feel like they're overreacting a bit. Like I said, SpongeBob didn't mean to cause so much trouble for everyone, so it's kind of weird that they're so dead set on getting rid of Bubble Buddy. I guess that's part of the joke though, making a big deal out of a really small issue. It also leads to one of the most memorable lines for me when the town decides to get rid of Bubble Buddy.
He poisoned our water supply, burned our crops, and delivered a plague unto our houses!
He did?
No, but are we just gonna wait around until he does?
Speaking of which, the comedy is what really saves this episode for me. Right at the start, the idea of SpongeBob celebrating Leif Erikson Day is so funny and random, but at the same time, that holiday would be a better alternative to Columbus Day.
Hey everybody, it's Leif Erikson Day! Hinga-dinga-durgan!
Another memorable moment for me is shortly after when SpongeBob tries to see if Squidward can play with him.
No.
Are you sure?
Yes.
And of course, there's the really funny twist that Bubble Buddy was actually alive the whole time, and he actually came back in a later episode called Bubble Buddy Returns. Overall, this definitely isn't one of the best episodes from Season 2, but it still has a fun premise and some really funny moments. Let's change things up a bit by looking at an episode from Season 3, One Crab's Trash. This is another episode where, despite the fact that it doesn't immediately stick out as one of my favorites in the series, I still have fun rewatching it. The plot of this episode is pretty weird but also really funny. Mr. Krabs gives SpongeBob a soda drinking hat that he thinks is just a piece of garbage, but when he finds out that it might actually be worth a lot of money, he desperately tries to get it back. And from there, the story just gets crazier and crazier. Mr. Krabs tries to tell SpongeBob that the hat once belonged to a guy named Smitty Werber Jaegerman Jensen, who passed away, and it turns out that he was a real guy, leading SpongeBob to bring the hat back to his grave. Mr. Krabs then has to go dig it up and find Smitty's skeleton, along with the whole army of the undead. It honestly feels like the writers were just making up the story as they went along, and it works surprisingly well. The unpredictable nature of the plot just makes it funnier and allows for plenty of absurd jokes. One of my favorite moments is when Mr. Krabs makes a fake ghost to scare SpongeBob, except he drew it on the back of a shopping list, and SpongeBob's reaction is so hilarious.
Oh my gosh! A floating shopping list! Ah!
There's also the iconic moment where Mr. Krabs runs into Squidward at the graveyard.
Here lie Squidward's hopes and dreams. What a baby.
The second half of the episode is when the humor really shines, even if the first half is kind of slow in comparison. But despite its slow start, this episode just keeps getting funnier as it goes along. Up next is Welcome to the Chum Bucket from Season 2. This episode may not have as many laughs as the others, but it's one of the few that packs a surprisingly emotional punch. This is evident right from the setup of the episode, which sees SpongeBob accidentally being sold off to Plankton to work at the Chum Bucket. The whole time, SpongeBob is absolutely miserable being away from his girl at the Krusty Krab, and Mr. Krabs is just as depressed being without SpongeBob. This is one of those episodes where you can really tell that Mr. Krabs genuinely cares about SpongeBob and doesn't just see him as a moneymaker. I wish we could have gotten more from that side of him in later episodes. It also leads to what I think is the highlight of the episode, which is the musical number Greasy Spoon, also known as Without You. The song is a beautiful ballad that almost sounds like it could have been in an actual Broadway musical, and once again it adds to the emotional weight of the episode.
It's just a greasy spoon. Without you.
And it seems other fans agree with me, because there have been plenty of covers of the song on YouTube.
But this grill is not a home. This is not the stove I know. I would trade it all away if you come back to stay.
But don't worry, this episode isn't a complete tearjerker. There are still some really funny moments, most of which come towards the end when Plankton becomes fed up with SpongeBob and tries to replace him with a robot.
Or should I say Robot Bob Sponge Chef Pants? I put the brain in the robot, you know.
When that idea doesn't work either, Plankton finally gives in and gives SpongeBob back to Krabs, which is honestly the best way to end the episode. Welcome to the Chum Bucket is a surprisingly emotional but still really fun episode all around. Now let's take a look at the first Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy episode on this list, which is actually their second episode overall. These characters were always such a fun part of the show, and it sucks that we don't see them anymore as their voice actors, Ernest Borgnine and Tim Conway, have both passed away. While these actors were legendary in their own right, my first exposure to them was through these characters, and I bet a lot of other people from my generation were introduced to them the same way. As for this episode, it's probably my least favorite Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy episode from the classic era, but I still like it quite a bit. In this one, SpongeBob wins a contest which lets him use a conch shell to call Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy whenever he wants. As you can imagine, SpongeBob abuses this power, so to appease him, the superheroes try to make SpongeBob their sidekick, which of course leads to all sorts of mishaps. Probably the most noteworthy thing about this episode is the introduction of one of Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy's arch-enemies, the Dirty Bubble. In this episode, he's voiced by the amazing Charles Nelson Riley, but in most future appearances he would be voiced by Tom Kenny. While the Dirty Bubble doesn't get a ton of screen time, his design and voice definitely left an impression on me as a kid.
Still getting burned on that tailpipe, huh, Barnacle Boy?
As for the comedy, the two jokes that really stick out to me are at the beginning when the newsfish misreads SpongeBob's name.
And the winner is Springboob SquarePants.
And later on in the episode when SpongeBob attacks a retired enemy of Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy.
If I weren't retired, I'd...
I also love this line from Mermaid Man about SpongeBob towards the end.
After all, he could be the hero of tomorrow, or the villain.
Outside of all of those, there isn't a ton to remember from this episode, but it's still a fun time overall. And fittingly enough, the next episode we'll be discussing is actually the first Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy episode. I find this one to be a bit better than their second episode for two reasons. One is that, well, it's their very first episode of the series, so it has some historical significance. but also because it's another episode that was on that GBA video compilation I used to watch. So once again, I remember this episode really well. It does a really good job of introducing the superhero duo, which the basic concept is to show what it would look like if a superhero got old and retired. They're also a clear parody of Batman and Robin from the 60s Batman series. In fact, Adam West and Burt Ward once voiced younger versions of the characters in a later episode.
Sounds good on paper, you purveyor of pure evil, but fortunately we all know what happens to paper underwater.
Merman and Barnacle Boy have a great dynamic. The latter is kind of your typical cranky old man, while the former is extremely senile and has some of the funniest lines in the episode. In fact, my favorite scene is in the middle of the episode when SpongeBob gets kicked out of the retirement home.
If you don't get out of here, then by the power invested in me, I now pronounce you man and wife.
What is going on in here?
You may kiss the bride.
The episode definitely gets a lot of mileage out of the running joke of Merman and Barnacle Boy being old, which to some might come off as a bit ageist, but I've always found it to be really funny. Overall, this episode is a great introduction to two of the most underrated characters on SpongeBob. Next, we'll be returning to Season 3 with Doing Time. I always get this episode mixed up with The Life of Crime from the second season, since they both have similar titles and both deal with characters going to jail. In fact, while writing the segment, I actually started reviewing Life of Crime until I realized that it was the wrong episode. Some SpongeBob fan I am. Anyways, this episode actually centers on Mrs. Puff, and it's one of surprisingly many times in the show that she's sent to jail. This time it's because of how much property damage she's caused by SpongeBob's driving lessons. But to Mrs. Puff's surprise, she actually prefers being in jail because she gets some time away from SpongeBob. But nevertheless, SpongeBob and Patrick try to break her out. Mrs. Puff has never been one of my favorite characters in the show, so I'm always a bit less interested when she's at the center. But this episode makes up for it with some great absurd humor. One of my favorite scenes is when SpongeBob and Patrick try to rob a bank to get into jail. The whole scene is just comedy gold, and one of the best examples of SpongeBob and Patrick's stupidity being well written.
You're facing the wrong way, sir.
All right, give me the money.
The end of the episode is also hilarious with how insane it gets. Mrs. Puff eventually realizes that her whole time in jail was just a dream, only to discover that she's in another dream, and then in another dream, and so on. It's like a precursor to Inception or something. It honestly gives me the impression that the writers had no idea how to end the episode, so they just made shit up as they went along, and I love it for that. And spoilers, this isn't the only episode to give that impression. And the next episode is another one centered around Mrs. Puff, No Free Rides. Like I said, I'm not a huge Mrs. Puff fan. Tired of SpongeBob's constant failures at the driving test, Mrs. Puff decides to help SpongeBob out with some extra credit. Although SpongeBob completely fails the extra credit, in a really funny scene I might add.
I can do this! I can do this! Is it hot in here, Mrs. Puff? Why is it so hot in here? Ah! My hand is cramping, Mrs. Puff! Make it stop!
Mrs. Puff gives him its license anyway. But when she realizes the gravity of what she's done, Mrs. Puff tries to prevent SpongeBob from driving. What's interesting about this episode is that it's one of the first that hints at Mrs. Puff's mysterious past, even suggesting that she may have had a completely different life. The fact that she's been to jail so many times, as we've already established, only adds to the mystery surrounding her.
I'll have to move to a new city, start a new boating school with a new name. No, not again.
But as for the episode itself, it's another pretty fun time. Once again, we get to see SpongeBob's parents, and even see his dad possibly hit on Mrs. Puff.
I think you've made your point, dear.
Yeah.
And the sequence where Mrs. Puff tries to take SpongeBob's new car away is just full of great gags. My personal favorite is when SpongeBob disguises himself as the car radio.
And now back to KRUD with all of your personal "you won't get away with stealing my car" hits.
I also love SpongeBob's reaction to finding out that the boatjacker is really Mrs. Puff. It's such a bizarre little moment, but it never fails to crack me up.
Mrs. Puff?
So once again, this isn't one of the most memorable episodes of the show, but I always have fun revisiting it. Next, we'll be going way back to another very early episode, Pickles. This is the fourth episode that was on the GBA video compilation, and growing up, it was probably my favorite of the bunch. This episode serves as the introduction to Bubble Bass, a character that honestly didn't make many appearances for a while after this one. However, the more recent episodes have made him a much more prominent character, and I'm glad they did, as he's a lot of fun. Bubble Bass is basically the embodiment of an entitled customer. Basically the SpongeBob equivalent of a Karen. No, not that Karen. It's really fun to see Squidward deal with them at the beginning of the episode in his usual sarcastic way.
I'll take a double triple bossy deluxe on a raft, 4x4 animal style, extra shingles with a shimmy and a squeeze, light axle grease, make it cry, burn it, and let it swim.
We serve food here, sir.
SpongeBob makes a special Krabby Patty for Bubble Bass, but when he appears to have forgotten the pickles, SpongeBob loses all his confidence and basically forgets all of his fry cooking skills. I think we've all felt like this at some point, where we're so burned out that we lose the energy to do basic things. SpongeBob takes some time off at home where he gets even more confused, and since Squidward is running the grill, the food at the Krusty Krab gets worse, needing Mr. Krabs to help SpongeBob get back to his old self. I love how when Mr. Krabs first goes to SpongeBob's house and sees everything in disarray, the background music is playing backwards. I just think that's a really clever touch.
SpongeBob!
I also love how supportive and patient Mr. Krabs is with SpongeBob. Sure, you could argue that he just wants SpongeBob to make more money for him, but Mr. Krabs never gets angry at SpongeBob while he deals with this crisis. Again, it shows that Mr. Krabs does genuinely care about SpongeBob. Overall, this is definitely one of the better episodes from Season 1, managing to be both funny and heartwarming. Up next is Culture Shock, also from Season 1, and this is another one of the more memorable episodes from the first season. In order to bring some more business to the Krusty Krab, Squidward organizes a talent show in the restaurant, but of course he's mostly concerned with his own performance. The best parts of the episode are seeing everyone's performances in the show, from Pearl doing a cheerleading routine with destructive results,
Krusty Krab! Krusty Krab!
to Gary doing beat poetry,
He has such a way with words.
to Plankton doing a magic act that's really just a way for him to try and steal the formula. But my favorite part of the episode is Squidward's interpretive dance at the end, which features some really funny and surreal animation. And it's made even funnier by the audience's reaction, who absolutely hate it.
What the?
Oddly enough, SpongeBob ends up being the star of the show, even though he just cleans up after. As funny as it is, I can't help but feel a little sorry for Squidward not getting as much recognition despite putting in way more work than SpongeBob. I feel like that's some sort of commentary for how the entertainment industry works. It also weirdly foreshadows how SpongeBob would become by far Nickelodeon's biggest show to the point where they're still trying to exploit it to this day. But overall, this is another fun episode that I have fond memories of. Our next episode is Karate Choppers, which introduced one of SpongeBob and Sandy's favorite hobbies, karate. But once this hobby gets in the way of SpongeBob's job, Mr. Krabs tries to put a stop to it. What's funny about this episode is how, much like the hooks in Hooky, SpongeBob's karate can almost be viewed as an allegory for a real-life issue. Only this time, instead of addiction, I think this could be a metaphor for people having to hide their true selves from the world. Specifically how LGBT people often have to hide their identities, even though they've slowly become more accepted by society. I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but that's the impression I get. But outside of the effective message of being yourself, there's still some great humor here. The scenes of SpongeBob and Sandy doing karate are hilariously over the top, especially towards the end when they have a picnic to try and distract themselves from karate, only to give in to it later. I love how in this scene SpongeBob's karate gear seems to just appear out of nowhere.
You're mincemeat.
In your dreams.
Admittedly, the scene where Mr. Krabs fires SpongeBob for doing karate is pretty sad, but it's balanced out by SpongeBob's crazy meltdown over it. Speaking of which, I think this was actually the first time SpongeBob ever got fired from the Krusty Krab, which would happen a few more times in the series, but not often. But of course, SpongeBob gets to keep his job and everything works out. The episode ends with quite possibly my favorite ending line in the whole series. Seriously, it's the funniest part of the episode.
I love karate. I love karate.
I love money.
I hate all of you.
Next, we'll be going back to Season 3 with the 4th Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy episode. This one sees SpongeBob getting his hands on Mermaid Man's utility belt, but goes a little overboard with the belt's shrinking ray. This leads to SpongeBob shrinking all of Bikini Bottom in a panic, but not before we get some really funny and iconic moments. The whole scene of SpongeBob trying to get Patrick to help him unshrink Squidward is just full of hilarious jokes. My favorite, and quite possibly the most famous part, is when Patrick suggests changing the setting on the belt to Wumbo.
You got it set to M for Minnie, when it should be set to W for Wumbo.
It also leads to one of the darkest lines in the entire show,
Wumbo-wing.
I wonder if a fall from this height would be enough to kill me.
I also like the resolution of the episode, which is to just shrink the rest of Bikini Bottom so everything is back to its correct proportions. But wait, does this mean that the rest of the series technically takes place in a shrunken Bikini Bottom? Or maybe they brought everything back to its normal size at some point? You know what, I'm thinking about this way too hard. The show is not that deep. And what do you know, next up is another Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy episode. Only this time it's the third one. And oddly enough, the only one from Season 2. This one introduces one of the hero's biggest enemies, Man Ray, voiced wonderfully by John Rhys Davies.
By the supreme authority of wickedness, I, the evil Man Ray, command you to release me from this frozen prison at once!
Man Ray is accidentally set free by SpongeBob and Patrick, who have to watch the Mermaid Lair while Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy are away. Speaking of which, this is also the first time we see their lair. The two try to teach Man Ray how to be good, with hilarious results. The whole wallet exchange between Patrick and Man Ray is just so funny from beginning to end. And there's a reason why it's become such a popular meme format.
I found this ID in this wallet, and if that's the case, this must be your wallet.
That makes sense to me.
Then take it.
It's not my wallet.
Oh!
I also like all the gadgets in the Mermaid Lair, especially the Orb of Confusion.
Take this!
I also love how the invisible boatmobile only needs you to have an invisible license to drive it. That's some classic SpongeBob logic right there. Overall, not a lot to say about this episode, but as usual, it's a memorably fun time.
74.
At number 74, we have the Smoking Peanut, which took me forever to find out is the play on the phrase the smoking gun. The title refers to how, in the start of the episode, SpongeBob and Patrick visit a giant clam at the zoo, but when it won't perform for them, SpongeBob throws a peanut at it, which seemingly sends it into a flying rage. This leads to the whole town trying to find out who did this, leaving SpongeBob feeling extremely guilty. In a way, the episode is kinda similar to Procrastination from the same season, since both episodes deal with SpongeBob being paranoid over a seemingly minor act. In this one, it's pretty funny how the whole town takes this case so seriously, especially when Patrick tries to solve the case himself.
I'm so close to solving this crime, I can almost taste it.
Probably my favorite moment in the episode is when the police think that Patrick was the culprit.
Wow, you guys are good. I'm the last person I would have suspected, but I was looking for me all the time. It's the perfect crime.
But as it turns out, it was neither SpongeBob or Patrick. The claim's rage was caused by Mr. Krabs stealing its pearl, which is very in character for him. But before that, we get another one of my favorite moments when Patrick gets pelted by the crowd at the zoo. But when SpongeBob finally confesses what he did, they just throw the peanuts at both of them.
Hey! Let's throw peanuts at both of them!
Overall, while it may not be the most memorable episode from the classic era, the Smoking Peanut still leaves a positive impression on me. Now let's go back to the first season and take a look at Employee of the Month. Like the Great Snail Race, which we already talked about, this one sees SpongeBob trying to compete with Squidward, though in my opinion it handles this theme much better. This time the two face off to see who can win the coveted Employee of the Month award. SpongeBob has a long streak of winning the award and will do anything to keep it. Squidward is uninterested at first, but eventually gets sucked into the competition. This leads to a lot of great sequences of SpongeBob and Squidward trying to one-up each other. My favorite is probably when SpongeBob tries to break Squidward's alarm clock, only to find that he has a whole closet full of them, which has also become a popular meme format. But the whole episode features some of the best physical comedy in the first season, as SpongeBob and Squidward's duel gets increasingly extreme. I also love the moment when they seem to call a truce only to stab each other in the back again.
He's nothing but a lying, boneless, ink-squirting, big-nosed phony.
Look at that buck-toothed, corn-fed smile. You can't trust him as far as you can throw him.
Overall, this is definitely one of the more memorable episodes from the first season. Our next episode was actually the very last one to air before the first movie, Prank-a-Lot. And honestly, this is a pretty good way to cap off the classic era of SpongeBob. The premise of the episode is a little weird, even by this show standards, which means that the writers may have been running out of ideas at this point. SpongeBob and Patrick get some invisible spray from a prank store, which turns anyone who gets sprayed with it completely invisible. Man, I wish this stuff existed in real life, it would be so cool. The episode gets a lot of mileage out of SpongeBob and Patrick being invisible, which leads to some really funny gags. The way SpongeBob and Patrick prank everyone in Bikini Bottom by pretending to be ghosts is just so funny and creative. Like how Patrick fills Sandy's entire house with photos of himself.
And since when did I acquire all these portraits of Patrick?
But my favorite joke is probably when you see everyone screaming,
Ghosts!
and that one guy just goes,
Toast.
It's so stupid that he can't help but laugh. Mr. Krabs is the last one they scare, but he ends up getting his revenge by exposing SpongeBob and Patrick in probably the most humiliating way possible.
The Krusty Krab presents Live Nude Pranksters! Starring the Bikini Bottom Ghosts!
All in all, this is another classic, unforgettable episode. Next up is Survival of the Idiots from Season 2. One of the best examples of how well SpongeBob did stupid jokes. This is actually one of 2 episodes from Season 2 which deals with Sandy going into hibernation. We'll get to the other one soon. Which means that SpongeBob and Patrick can't play with her. Once they go into the tree dome anyway, they discover that the whole place is cold and snowy. Weirdly enough, SpongeBob and Patrick seem to have no idea what snow is, but a later episode shows that it does snow occasionally in Bikini Bottom. But again, this is SpongeBob we're talking about, so don't think about it too hard. Seeing SpongeBob and Patrick try to deal with the cold is really funny, but for me, Patrick is the character that shines the most in this episode. It features some of Patrick's funniest and most iconic lines, such as the pat back gag.
Hi there, SpongeBob. My name is Pat Back.
And my personal favorite, the whole scene when SpongeBob and Patrick play cowboy and argue over which one is Dirty Dan.
All right, Pinhead, your time is up.
Who you calling Pinhead?
This was caused by SpongeBob and Patrick hearing Sandy talk in her sleep, which is another really funny scene.
Hey Sandy, does it work?
But things go haywire when Sandy wakes up and goes completely feral against SpongeBob and Patrick, only to completely forget about it once spring comes. Overall, Survival of the Idiots shows off some hilariously stupid comedy, and some of Patrick's finest moments. Now let's look at another Season 2 episode, Imitation Crabs. I always get this episode confused with Crabborg from Season 3, since both episodes deal with Mr. Krabs being replaced by a robot, but of course we'll get to that later. In this one, Plankton comes up with a new scheme to steal the Krabby Patty formula, in which he builds a robot to disguise himself as Mr. Krabs. I love how Squidward can immediately tell it's not the real Krabs, but still takes the day off when Plankton tells him to.
You're not Mr. Krabs.
Hey, why don't you take the rest of the day off?
Whatever you say, Mr. Krabs.
SpongeBob, on the other hand, can't tell the 2 Krabs apart, leading to some really funny gags where Plankton tries to get SpongeBob to give him the formula. But to do so, they have to perform a long ritual that gets more and more absurd as it goes on. It starts with having to recite the Bikini Bottom anthem while balancing a glass of chocolate milk on your head, which by the way I've always wanted to try in real life.
Oh, Bikini Bottom, we pledge our hearts to you, as faithful, as deep, as true as blue. Bikini Bottom, we love you.
It ends with Plankton being shot out of a cannon and reciting a chant about spaghetti. Again, it's just so stupid that it's hilarious.
Meatball, meatball, spaghetti underneath. Ravioli, ravioli, Great Barrier Reef.
That's not even mentioning another really funny gag early in the episode, when a paranoid SpongeBob rips a head off a customer thinking it's one of Plankton's disguises, only to reveal this.
Everyone at the head enhancement clinic said nobody would notice.
It's one of the most absurd yet hilarious jokes in the whole show. But skipping ahead to the ending, what's amazing is that Plankton almost gets away with this plan before being blown up in the funniest way possible.
Self-destruct coin slot has been activated. 10 seconds till detonation.
Coin-operated self-destruct. Not one of my better ideas.
So while Imitation Crabs may not be quite as good as the other Mr. Krabs robot episode, it's still a hilarious time from beginning to end. And our next episode is yet another one from Season 2, I'm Your Biggest Fanatic. This episode marks the first and, as far as I know, only appearance of Kevin, a jellyfish expert who SpongeBob idolizes. He's a really funny character, and it would have been nice to see him make another appearance, but then again, maybe he works best as a one-time character. For me, the funniest parts are actually at the beginning of the episode when SpongeBob and Patrick run around in a jellyfish convention. It's funny seeing Patrick touch everything in sight and later chase down Jeffrey the jellyfish.
Oh my gosh! Jeffrey Jellyfish! Oh, wait, Jeffrey! I have to touch you!
Hey!
It's at this convention where SpongeBob meets Kevin, who quickly gets annoyed by him. Kevin then tricks SpongeBob into thinking he's being initiated into his Jelly Spotters Club, which is really just an excuse to torture him. Admittedly, it's a little sad seeing SpongeBob go through all this torture when all he wanted was to be a jelly spotter, but at least Kevin gets his comeuppance at the end. Besides the beginning, I think the other funniest parts of the episode are the other members of the club, which are those same anchovy guys who mostly only say meep. I don't know what it is about these guys that always makes me laugh, but I think this episode makes the best use of them.
Wah, wah, wah. Will you cut that out?
So despite an occasionally mean-spirited tone, I'm your biggest fanatic more than makes up for it with some really funny moments and a satisfying ending. Coincidentally, the next episode we're looking at is another one about jellyfishing called, well, jellyfishing. This episode is important as not only is it one of the first in the entire series, but it's also the episode that introduces SpongeBob and Patrick's favorite hobby. However, this episode also has particular importance for me for a reason similar to the ones from the GBA video compilation. See, when I was a kid, I had a SpongeBob VHS called Sponge Buddies. For a while, it was the only piece of SpongeBob home media that I owned, and I watched it endlessly as a kid. One of the episodes on it was jellyfishing, so as you can imagine, I remember this episode particularly well. The episode starts out simply. SpongeBob and Patrick go jellyfishing, and Squidward makes fun of them by sarcastically saying he would love to join them. But then Squidward crashes his bike down a hill in a scene which features some of Roger Bumpus' funniest voice acting as Squidward. The crash leaves him so badly injured that he ends up in a body cast for the rest of the episode, forcing him to go jellyfishing with SpongeBob and Patrick in an attempt to make him feel better. This premise lends itself to a lot of potential for funny gags, and this episode takes great advantage of it. One of the funniest scenes for me is when Patrick tries to get Squidward to hold a jellyfishing net.
Firmly grasp it!
I also love when Squidward finally manages to catch a jellyfish, only to anger a much bigger one. Speaking of which, it's a testament to how strong of a character Squidward is, that even when he can't speak for most of the episode, we still get a good idea of what's going through his head just by his actions and facial expressions. Overall, this is another fun and hilarious episode that brings back a lot of great memories for me. We return to the second season with Krusty Love, one of the more interesting episodes of the series. This episode actually marks the first time that Mr. Krabs and Mrs. Puff interacted with each other, and the results are pretty surprising. Mr. Krabs actually falls in love with Mrs. Puff and the two begin going out. But after Mr. Krabs overspends on their first date, he tries to get SpongeBob to help manage his money for the next one. The result is a really interesting character study of Mr. Krabs, as he's constantly torn between showing his love for Mrs. Puff through his excessive spending and wanting to save money. It also results in some really funny moments where SpongeBob becomes increasingly exasperated at Mr. Krabs' indecision, leading to one of the few times that he actually blew up at him.
Mr. Krabs! Yugga hugga merkin wallet! Zippy bibby spin! Ribbing flipping to ship of Mr. Krabs' wallet!
This part also contains the really funny run-in gag of SpongeBob tracing his lines in the air, which has a hilarious payoff.
Then you'll say, we're not talking about this, or this, we're talking about this!
I think it might also be a reference to a scene in Pulp Fiction, but I'm not 100% sure. We also learn quite a bit about Mrs. Puff herself, most notably through another funny joke early on when Mr. Krabs asks about Mrs. Puff's marital status.
Oh no, Mr. Krabs, she's single.
Then what happened to Mr. Puff?
She doesn't like to talk about it.
This scene clearly implies that her husband died at some point, but how exactly? Maybe it was just an accident, or maybe Mrs. Puff played a role in it, since we know she's done some shady stuff in the past. It only adds to Mrs. Puff's incredibly mysterious backstory. The one thing that kind of annoys me about this episode is that, as far as I know, the series never really explored Mr. Krabs and Mrs. Puff's romantic relationship again. The ending implies that they're still interested in each other, so it would have been cool to see their relationship evolve. Then again, SpongeBob isn't exactly known for his continuity, so maybe that's not a huge issue. But either way, Krusty Love is not only a really funny episode, but also provides some interesting insight into some of the characters. Next, we'll be going way back to the third episode of the entire series, Tea at the Tree Dome. And it's also one of the most important episodes of the show because, well, it's where SpongeBob meets Sandy for the first time. This episode serves as a great introduction to the character, immediately establishing her as a tough but intelligent squirrel. But when SpongeBob tries to go to Sandy's house without any water, he struggles in the new environment while trying to impress her. Seeing SpongeBob slowly suffer in Sandy's house is both dark but also really funny, especially this moment, which I find to be so relatable.
I don't need it. I don't need it. I definitely don't need it. I 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 need it!
Things get even crazier when Patrick tries to help SpongeBob, only to run into the exact same problem as him, which leads to another hilarious line.
What kind of place is this?
I also like how rather than judge SpongeBob too harshly, Sandy comes up with a solution to give SpongeBob and Patrick water helmets, which will become a staple of the rest of the series. Not only is Tea at the Tree Dome a landmark episode for SpongeBob, but it's also a lot of fun to watch. Next up is another Season 1 episode with Sandy at the focus, Texas. This is one of those episodes that gets surprisingly emotional, since it involves Sandy becoming homesick for Texas while SpongeBob and Patrick try to cheer her up. It's really wholesome to see the two try to help Sandy like this, showing how much they care about her. But of course, the episode isn't all sad and still has some great jokes. The best example of this is the climax, when SpongeBob and Patrick try to lure Sandy to her surprise at the Krusty Krab by making fun of Texas, which gets her to chase them. The two get absolutely brutal with their Texas jokes, especially with this classic exchange.
Hey, Patrick, what am I now?
Stupid?
No, I'm Texas!
What's the difference?
It's also funny when they realize that they may have gone too far with their teasing and start to fear for their lives. But in the end, it turns out that SpongeBob and his friends arranged a surprise party for Sandy that's entirely Texas-themed. Not only is it funny how they misinterpreted everything Sandy told them about Texas, but I also find it really wholesome how the whole town worked to cheer her up. Again, it shows just how loved she is by the characters. I should also mention the episode's original song with the same title as the episode, Texas. It's a really sweet country song that adds to the emotional weight of the episode.
I wanna go home, home, home.
I wanna go home.
Overall, this episode is a perfect example of how SpongeBob can not only make us laugh, but also tug at our heartstrings. Now let's look at yet another Season 1 episode, this time centering around Mr. Krabs, Squeaky Boots. This is definitely one of the more memorable episodes of the first season, not only because of its comedy, but also for how strange and kind of dark it can get. The episode starts with Mr. Krabs giving Pearl an old pair of boots for her birthday. And fun fact, this was actually Pearl's very first appearance in the entire series, which may explain why Mr. Krabs' song to her is so oddly specific.
Pearl's my daughter, I'll spit in your eye. Yo ho, Pearl's a whale, and it's her birthday. Ya ya ya. Ta-da!
After Pearl rejects the boots, Mr. Krabs gives them to SpongeBob, but their incessant squeaking quickly drives him to insanity. The plot of this episode is actually loosely based on Edgar Allan Poe's short story, The Telltale Heart, about a man who becomes increasingly paranoid after hearing what he thinks is the beating heart of another man that he killed, which he later realizes is his own heartbeat. Mr. Krabs experiences a similar sensation when, after stealing the boots back from SpongeBob, he starts to hear their squeaking everywhere until he finally breaks down and confesses. For me, this whole scene is the highlight of the episode because of how creative the visuals get, especially Mr. Krabs' downright surreal facial expressions.
I took the boots!
The one thing that bogs the episode down for me is actually the squeaking of the boots itself, which can honestly get really annoying after a while. I know that was probably the point, but it still kind of gets on my nerves a little bit. But other than that, this is another pretty solid episode from the first season. Next up is SB129, once again from the first season. This was actually one of the last SpongeBob episodes, or cartoons in general, to air in the 20th century, airing on the last day of 1999. So it's fitting that the episode deals with traveling to the distant future. More specifically, Squidward hides from SpongeBob and Patrick in the Krusty Krab's freezer, but ends up being frozen for 1,000 years. When Squidward is finally thawed out in the future, he uses a time machine to go all across time, only to find that he can never escape SpongeBob and Patrick. This episode has a much larger variety of environments than usual thanks to all the different time periods Squidward goes to. The future is made entirely out of chrome, which they make clear in a very funny scene.
He's right!
Then Squidward goes to prehistoric times where it's full of extinct sea creatures. And finally he ends up in a sort of vacuum. This is where the animation gets truly surreal, starting out in a blank environment before psychedelic images start appearing. Seriously, this is probably the trippiest moment in the entire show.
I gotta get out of here!
The episode also gets some great comedic moments throughout each time period, showing creative ways how SpongeBob and Patrick keep coming into Squidward's life, either through future versions of themselves or as cavemen. My favorite scene is actually when Squidward realizes how many SpongeBob robots there are and sort of snaps. The episode also serves as a great example of how Squidward secretly cares for SpongeBob, since his admission for missing SpongeBob is what finally brings him back home. The episode ends with a pretty funny twist that ties into a scene from when Squidward was in the past.
Oh, who's the barnacle head who invented that game anyway?
You are, Squidward!
Going back.
62? Whoa!
At number 62, we have Opposite Day. This one has such a genius premise that's just perfect for this show. For the first time in the entire series, and one of the few times in general, Squidward is so fed up with SpongeBob and Patrick that he finally decides to move away. Kinda surprising that he hadn't tried that before. But when the real estate agent makes it clear that she can't sell a house with bad neighbors, Squidward has to keep SpongeBob and Patrick out of the way by creating a fake holiday called Opposite Day. But as you'd expect, Squid's plan backfires hilariously. First, SpongeBob and Patrick completely wreck SpongeBob's house, and then they conclude that in order to be truly opposite, they have to pretend to be Squidward. The parts of them acting like Squidward are some of the funniest in the whole episode. I love how SpongeBob actually does a really good Squidward impression, while Patrick is barely trying.
After you, Mr. Squidward.
Why, thank you, Mr. Squidward.
Things get even crazier when they try to pass themselves off as Squidward to the real estate agent. When Squidward comes back, the confusion leads to the most hilarious scene in the episode, and one of my favorite scenes in the show, period. It's just so funny seeing the real estate agent get totally fed up with these people's antics.
What kind of fool do you take me for? He's Squidward, you're Squidward, I'm Squidward! Are there any other Squidwards I should know about?
Meow.
It's also really funny seeing Squidward finally snap at SpongeBob and Patrick at the end by using their logic against them. Overall, this is just a really funny episode with an equally funny concept. The next episode is actually the one that directly precedes Opposite Day, Nature Pants. I sort of go back and forth on which episode I like better, but I think Nature Pants has the slight advantage, and I find it to be one of the most underrated episodes of the show. Like a few of the other episodes we've discussed, like Texas, this episode really shows how SpongeBob can be both funny and emotional. In the episode, SpongeBob decides to give up his life in Bikini Bottom so he can live among the jellyfish in the wild. The episode doesn't make it clear why exactly SpongeBob decided this, but I think a lot of us have had moments when we're just kind of fed up with the modern world and want to run off in the woods. It's not just me, right? Anyways, SpongeBob's friends try to get him to come back, but when that doesn't work, Patrick becomes furious and starts hunting SpongeBob like a maniac. This is when the comedy of the episode really shines. And of course, it gives us that absolutely iconic shot of Patrick looking down at SpongeBob.
I got you now, SpongeBob!
At the same time though, SpongeBob starts to realize that living in nature is a lot harder than he thought. And this is when the episode's emotional side starts to kick in. It's really sad seeing SpongeBob miss his old life so much, but it's balanced out by a really heartwarming scene where SpongeBob's friends welcome him back with open arms. This is the kind of episode that always puts me in a warm and fuzzy mood, along with giving me some good laughs. Now we'll be skipping way ahead to one of the last episodes of the classic era, SpongeBob Meets the Strangler. Once again, you can tell that the writers may have been running out of ideas at this point since the premise is just so bizarre, but also hilarious at the same time. This episode introduces one of my favorite one-off characters in the show, the Tattletale Strangler, who strangles anyone who rats him out to the police. When SpongeBob does exactly this, the Strangler sets out to get his revenge. It's so funny how SpongeBob is easily fooled by the Strangler even when he's only disguised by a mustache. But things quickly start to go wrong for the Strangler as SpongeBob inadvertently puts him in danger. Not only does the Strangler get increasingly exasperated at SpongeBob, but also at the other Bikini Bottom residents who keep throwing a surprise party for SpongeBob, even though he invited them to the parties.
How did you guys know today is my birthday?
We just do what the invitations say. Let's bug us some more.
It's great seeing the Strangler slowly be driven to absolute insanity by the other characters. And Thomas Wilson's voice performance makes it even funnier.
He's not the Strangler!
He's not?
I am!
Overall, this is one of the stupidest yet funniest episodes in the classic era. Up next is an early Season 2 episode, Big Pink Loser. This episode does a really good job of showing why SpongeBob and Patrick's friendship works so well. The episode starts with Patrick being sad that he doesn't have as many awards as SpongeBob, so to help him out, SpongeBob decides to get Patrick a job at the Krusty Krab. I like how Squidward immediately quits after finding out that Patrick is working there too.
Hey Squidward, guess who just got a job?
Guess who just quit?
Speaking of which, the scenes of Patrick trying to do basic jobs at the restaurant are the funniest of the whole episode. I love him trying to mop the floor with the wrong end and that one customer's reaction.
Hey pal, you just blowing from Stupid Town?
And SpongeBob trying to teach Patrick how to open a pickle jar. That whole scene is just pure gold.
Now put it on the lid. No, the lid. 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 Freeze!
When Patrick does finally open the jar, he decides that the best way to get an award is to mimic everything SpongeBob does, which leads to the main conflict of the episode. It's funny how far Patrick will go to be like SpongeBob, even reading his own thoughts, which is honestly kind of creepy.
At least I'm safe inside my mind.
At least I'm safe inside my mind.
In the end though, Patrick finally gets an award for doing absolutely nothing. That honestly seems like a bit of a cop-out ending, but at least it ends on a happy note. Overall, this episode is a really interesting look at SpongeBob and Patrick's dynamic. Up next is SpongeGuard on Duty from Season 3. This is probably the only classic episode that features Larry as one of the central characters. While Larry isn't one of my favorite characters on the show, it's nice to see him have the spotlight for once. And like many episodes involving Larry, this one is set in Goo Lagoon, where Larry mistakenly believes SpongeBob is the lifeguard after he got some ice cream on his nose. Kinda weird that this would be Larry's immediate assumption, but either way, SpongeBob goes along with it and tries to pass himself off as the lifeguard. But things get out of hand when SpongeBob realizes the responsibility he holds, and ends up trying a bit too hard to keep everyone safe. The extremes SpongeBob takes in this regard are pretty funny, but if you ask me, the real standout character here is Patrick. Right at the start of the episode, he leaves a good impression with one of the best gross-out jokes in the entire show.
Just a minute. Ah! I could have sworn I was laying on my back.
It really shines towards the end, when he ignores SpongeBob's rules and goes into the water, almost drowning in the process. I always crack up when SpongeBob tries to save him and Patrick just keeps accidentally putting him in danger. And the moment is made even better with the revelation that they were drowning in knee-deep water. SpongeGuard on Duty is definitely a standout episode, not only for being really funny, but also focusing on one of the more minor characters on the show. Our next episode is another double-length special, SpongeBob BC, also known as UGG. This is definitely one of the better special episodes for me. It has a really clever idea by showing what SpongeBob's world was like in prehistoric times and what the characters would be like as cavemen. Granted, this wasn't the first time we've seen the characters in this fashion, but it's still pretty cool. What's even more impressive is that the characters don't even speak English, instead speaking in their made-up limited cave language.
No tabanga Gary Pooga, tabanga asa gok o sailor, tabanga do, tabanga do.
But despite that, the cave versions of SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward still manage to keep their distinct personalities, which is really impressive. It's also really creative how the writers and storyboard artists changed parts of the show to reflect the prehistoric setting. Like how Gary is this gigantic dinosaur-like snail, and my personal favorite, the little crabs that all look and sound like Mr. Krabs.
Money, money, I got money, 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 I got.
But my favorite moment is when SpongeGuard figures out how to use fire, which is shown in this really weird but hilarious moment when he keeps flashing between different shots at an increasingly fast speed, all with a choir that we later see in a live-action shot. I think this might be a reference to 2001: A Space Odyssey, especially since they actually played the theme from that movie later on, but I could be wrong. Like the other specials, this one has some patchy segments, though admittedly they're not quite as good as the other ones. The big highlight is when Patchy thaws out a caveman who's actually played by Patrick's voice actor, Bill Fagerbakke. But then that leads to a pretty lame rap number with the caveman and a robot.
Worlds collide, it's a curious thing. Bet you never heard a robot and a caveman sing.
Though what's interesting is that this scene also shows clips from SB129, one of the only times when a classic episode had clips from a previous episode. But despite the lackluster patchy segments, SpongeBob BC is a fun and creative spin on the SpongeBob formula. Now we return to Season 2 with Patty Hype. This is another episode where I don't really have a lot of interesting things to say about it, but it's still a really fun time. The episode involves SpongeBob coming up with a new idea to increase business for the Krusty Krab. Multicolored Krabby Patties called Pretty Patties. On a side note, I've always wanted to try something like Pretty Patties for myself. I imagine that they would just taste like regular hamburgers, but I would still love to try them. Anyways, Mr. Krabs and Squidward laugh off the idea, so SpongeBob angrily goes to Patrick for help, which leads to probably my favorite line in the whole episode.
Hey, Patrick, are you angry too?
Yeah.
What's the matter?
I can't see my forehead.
The two start selling Pretty Patties themselves, and while it takes a while for people to notice, they soon become more popular than the Krusty Krab. Again, there's not a ton to say about this episode, but it has a really fun premise, and we get to see Mr. Krabs' scheming side as he tries to take advantage of SpongeBob's success. Overall, it's a pretty solid episode from Season 2. Up next is Snowball Effect, one of the few episodes I like to watch during the winter since it involves snow. The episode has a really clever explanation for how it snows in Bikini Bottom. Basically, a glacier drifts off from the Arctic to right above the city and slowly dissolves, creating little snowflakes under the water. I doubt that's even possible in real life, but hey, it's a cartoon. When Bikini Bottom is covered in snow, SpongeBob and Patrick start a snowball fight with each other. Squidward is uninterested at first, but of course he quickly gets sucked into the game. This is where the episode's humor really shines. It's evident just how seriously Squidward ends up taking the snowball fight, treating it like a full-on war. It's another great example of how Squidward secretly enjoys the antics SpongeBob and Patrick get up to. There's also some great visual gags and physical comedy during the snowball scenes, like SpongeBob using his hose as a machine gun for the snowballs, and Patrick's mouth getting stuffed with them. The episode also makes for a great companion piece for the Christmas special, which, by the way, I'll get to later, since once again it's one of the few episodes that heavily features snow. Snowball Effect is the perfect episode to watch on a cold winter day. Next up on our list is Jellyfish Hunter. There's a number of classic SpongeBob episodes that I believe are responsible for radicalizing my generation, and this is one of them. In this case, it teaches kids how capitalism can serve as a serious threat to wildlife. The episode starts with SpongeBob putting some jellyfish jelly on a Krabby Patty, which once again I've always wanted to try in real life. One customer tries some himself and absolutely loves it, leading to a musical number that's one of the highlights of the episode for me.
I just had a sandwich, no ordinary sandwich, a sandwich filled with jellyfish jelly.
When Mr. Krabs finds out about this, he sees a perfect business opportunity and orders SpongeBob to catch more jellyfish for their jelly. This is where the episode's moral really kicks in, as Mr. Krabs goes completely power crazy when trying to get more jelly. It also leads to my favorite moment of the whole episode, when Mr. Krabs keeps telling SpongeBob more, and ends up making this hilariously grotesque facial expression. It's one of the funniest visuals of the whole show.
More!
Anyways, SpongeBob realizes the damage Mr. Krabs is causing, and sets the jellyfish he captured free, which leads to another really funny moment when we think SpongeBob is about to kill Mr. Krabs.
Something that should have been done a long time ago!
No!
The squeaky bolt on this door was driving me crazy!
Not only is Jellyfish Hunter filled with great comedic moments, but it also has an important message that has stuck with me to this day. Next up is Wormy. This is another episode that was on the SpongeBuddies VHS, so once again I have a lot of fond memories of this one. In this episode, Sandy tasks SpongeBob and Patrick to take care of her many pets while she's away, which already sounds like a huge mistake, but whatever. SpongeBob and Patrick take a particular liking to her pet worm named Wormy. This leads to a cute montage of the two playing with Wormy, set to one of my favorite original songs in the show. But what SpongeBob and Patrick don't realize is that Wormy is actually a caterpillar, and overnight he transforms into a butterfly, which usually takes way longer than just one day to happen, but hey, it's a cartoon. SpongeBob and Patrick are terrified by the creature, and it soon starts causing panic all across Bikini Bottom. I especially like when the butterfly is shown in close-up live-action footage to show how the Bikini Bottom might see him.
Monster.
Another big highlight for me is when the city is being destroyed from everyone's panic, and during the chaos, SpongeBob says,
"We did it, Patrick! We saved the city!"
Which has become a really popular meme that can be applied to a lot of situations. Overall, this is a pretty solid episode from the second season that always gives me a huge nostalgia rush. Next up is another Season 2 episode, Pre-Hibernation Week. This episode could almost be seen as a sort of prequel to Survival of the Idiots, which shows Sandy in hibernation, as this episode had Sandy getting ready for said hibernation. Before the big day comes, Sandy wants to do as much fun stuff with SpongeBob as possible, but the activities become increasingly dangerous. At first, SpongeBob enjoys it, including one of my favorite moments at the beginning when they're skiing down a huge slope.
Oh, there once was a kid life's as extreme as you wanna make it!
But eventually, SpongeBob becomes fearful for his life and manages to sneak away from Sandy. This leads to Sandy starting a frantic search for SpongeBob, which I think is when the episode really picks up steam. First of all, I love Squidward's reaction to finding out that SpongeBob is missing.
SpongeBob's gone missing!
It's also really funny how the Bikini Bottom residents are obviously disinterested in the whole situation and would rather do anything else than look for SpongeBob.
This is a load of barnacles.
I heard that!
Overall, not much else to say about this episode except it's yet another fun time.
I can explain.
Up next is actually the episode that directly follows Pre-Hibernation Week, Life of Crime. This is the episode that I always get mixed up with the Doing Time from Season 3. Though in my opinion, this is definitely the superior episode. In this one, Mr. Krabs teaches SpongeBob and Patrick about borrowing, which is really an excuse for all the stuff Mr. Krabs has stolen over the years. The two decide to borrow a balloon, but when it pops before they can give it back, SpongeBob and Patrick are convinced that they've committed a heinous crime and go on the run. The funniest overall theme of this episode to me is how seriously SpongeBob and Patrick take all of this. They get absolutely paranoid and even almost turn on each other towards the end. This occurs during my favorite part of the episode, when Patrick mistakenly thinks SpongeBob stole his candy bar, even though Patrick actually ate his.
You took my only food! Now I'm gonna starve!
I also like the running gag that comes before that when Patrick asks about the fire underwater.
Hey, if we're underwater, how could there be a... I'm scared, SpongeBob!
I love moments like this where the characters question the logic of their own show. In the end, SpongeBob and Patrick turn themselves in, but it turns out to be a free balloon day, which is also a pretty funny twist. The last joke is a callback to the chocolate bar joke from earlier, which I think is a perfect way to end the episode.
Alright, which one of you flatfoot stole my lollipop?
Overall, this is another classic episode with a really funny premise. Alright, now we have officially entered the top 50, starting with Rockabye Bye Valve from Season 3. This is another episode with a deceptively simple premise, in which SpongeBob and Patrick decide to take in a baby scallop and raise it as their own. I'm pretty sure this episode was a response to the popular rumor that SpongeBob and Patrick were gay, which of course was never true. In fact, SpongeBob is actually asexual. The episode really takes advantage of the idea of SpongeBob and Patrick essentially being a romantic couple once they take in the scallop. In a time when same-sex couples were almost non-existent in kids' shows, this must have made a lot of people uncomfortable when it first aired. While this arrangement works out for SpongeBob and Patrick at first, the two start to resent each other in a really funny and kind of dark allegory for how a marriage can fall apart. Patrick takes on the role of the neglectful husband or father, leaving SpongeBob to do all the work around the house while Patrick goes to his job. But in a funny twist that falls perfectly in line with Patrick's character, his job is actually just him watching TV at his house.
Oh, so this is the thanks I get for working overtime.
Overtime!
It almost looks like their relationship will fall apart until the Scallop, or Junior as they call him, finally learns how to fly, no longer needing SpongeBob and Patrick. While this episode is really well constructed, it also has a ton of hilarious little gags that I'd like to highlight. Patrick's initial reaction to seeing the Scallop always makes me crack up.
It's a baby scallop.
I'll take care of this!
No, Patrick!
The part where they try to get Junior to stop crying is also full of hilarious moments, such as SpongeBob using his funny face, and the needlessly dark moment when a worm pops out of the apple.
Wait! We will bury you!
The scenes later on with SpongeBob and Patrick arguing are also really funny, with my favorite moments being the progression of time as SpongeBob gets more exhausted, and the running joke of Patrick laughing at the TV show.
That guy got hit in the head with a coconut!
The episode also ends with a really funny exchange between SpongeBob and Patrick as they watch Junior fly away.
Yeah, let's have another.
It's the perfect way to end a really solid episode, and a great way to kick off my top 50. Now we're gonna go way back to one of the first episodes of the whole series, Bubble Stand. Like many of the early episodes, this one has an effectively simple premise that plays into the characters' personalities extremely well. In this one, SpongeBob starts a stand where he lets people pay to blow bubbles, which of course quickly gets on Squidward's nerves. Eventually though, SpongeBob and Patrick get him to try blowing some of his own bubbles, which results in some of the funniest moments of the episode. My favorite sequence is when they try to teach Squidward their technique, leading him to throw a total tantrum and accidentally blow the biggest bubble anyone has ever seen.
And a little of this, a little of that, a little this, that.
Then Squidward claims that blowing bubbles is in his genes, leading SpongeBob and Patrick to start chanting,
Squid's got genes! Squid's got genes!
This scene always confused me as a kid because I didn't know about DNA or anything, and I was like, genes, but Squidward doesn't wear pants. Anyways, the episode ends with the bubble taking Squidward's house and floating it up in the air before sending it crashing down. This is a classic example of a good Squidward-centric episode. Squidward starts out being annoyed at SpongeBob and Patrick, then joins in on their antics before it completely backfires on him. This formula kinda got stale during the post-movie episodes, but for the classic ones like this episode, it provides us with a really fun time.
It's a giraffe!
And what do you know, the next episode is the one that directly follows Bubble Stand, Ripped Pants. This episode is noteworthy for being the introduction of Goo Lagoon and the character Larry the Lobster. Larry was never one of my favorite characters as I don't think he has a ton of personality, but thankfully he doesn't have a huge role in this episode, and instead is just a reason for SpongeBob to try to impress Sandy. This is one of those early episodes where you can tell that the writers were playing with the idea of SpongeBob and Sandy being a couple, a direction they would smartly move away from in later episodes. Quentin Reviews actually did a whole video talking about how this episode predicted meme culture, and I honestly agree. The story shows how a joke can be run into the ground until no one finds it funny anymore. In this case, the joke starts when SpongeBob accidentally rips his pants while trying to lift a weight. Once he realizes that everyone finds this hilarious, he begins leaning into it and winning the public's affection. At least at first. Gradually, the visitors at Goo Lagoon start becoming more annoyed at SpongeBob's constant jokes, and he finally takes things too far when he pretends to drown, which angers Sandy. SpongeBob ultimately learns this episode's moral that in order to keep your friends, you should just be yourself. Which is kind of a cliche message for a kid's show, but still an important one. This leads to probably the highlight of the episode, the song Ripped Pants. This number is so insanely catchy, and I've always thought it sounded like a cross between a Beach Boys song and an early Beatles track.
And no girl ever wants to dance with a fool who went and ripped his pants.
Overall, this episode is definitely a highlight from the first season for me. It's not a particularly funny episode, but it's a really sweet one with a nice message. Now we return to Season 3 with Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 5, which is easily my favorite episode starring the titular duo. In this one, Barnacle Boy gets tired of being treated like a kid and decides to become a villain, teaming up with Man Ray and the Dirty Bubble to form
Every
Every villain is lemons.
A name I absolutely love. Mermaid Man enlists SpongeBob, Patrick, Squidward, and Sandy to don the former costumes of the International Justice League of Super Acquaintances, another name I love, and defeat the villains. This episode is full of hilarious gags, starting with when Barnacle Boy joins the dark side.
Why should I waste money lighting the whole store?
The scene where the team first tries on the superhero costumes also has too many great gags to count. Though my favorite is probably SpongeBob as the Quickster.
Wanna see me run to that mountain and back? You wanna see me do it again?
I also love how the guy the team communicates with is played by a live-action human for no apparent reason. This episode also has one of the funniest payoffs in the whole series. After all this build-up of SpongeBob and his friends getting superpowers, once they actually confront the villains, they immediately destroy themselves without doing any fighting. Overall, this is just a hilarious episode from beginning to end, and as I said, it's easily my favorite Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy episode. Now let's go back to Season 1 with Naughty Nautical Neighbors. This was the first episode to feature a major conflict between SpongeBob and Patrick that causes them to stop being friends. Though in this case, it was actually Squidward who was secretly behind it. And when SpongeBob and Patrick start fighting over his affection, Squidward has to fix his mistake and make SpongeBob and Patrick be friends again. In between, we of course get plenty of memorable gags. Some of my favorites include the whole scene of Squidward choking on the fork and Patrick resuscitating him, the Solitude in E minor scene,
Yeah, E minor, alright, yeah!
the moment when SpongeBob tries to make his own friends, which is also one of the most relatable moments in the show,
The gang's all here.
and Squidward finding Patrick in his bathtub.
Hey, buddy, I warmed it up for you.
The climax of the episode is also pretty funny, with SpongeBob and Patrick competing to get more seltzer water from Squidward until they get completely fat. This leads to what I consider to be one of the sweetest and most sincere moments in the whole series, when SpongeBob and Patrick become friends again. There's absolutely no dialogue. Instead, SpongeBob lets out a burp, leading them to slowly start laughing until they're back to their normal selves. I find it to be the perfect encapsulation of SpongeBob and Patrick's friendship, and the fact that it's done almost entirely visually makes it all the more impressive. So not only is this another really funny episode, but it's made even better by some genuinely heartwarming moments. Going back to Season 3, let's take a look at New Student Starfish. In this one, Patrick decides to tag along with SpongeBob at boating school. With episodes like this one, I've always found it funny how they treat Mrs. Puff's boating school like a regular school with lockers, recess, field trips, and everything. In case you didn't know, real driving school doesn't work like that. You can tell that this was probably a compromise between Steve Hunenberg and the Nick executive so that SpongeBob would have an excuse to go to some type of school setting. But back to the episode itself, this is another early example of Patrick being kind of a bad friend to SpongeBob. Though here it thankfully works better than it did in I'm With Stupid. In this case, Patrick accidentally gets SpongeBob in trouble on multiple occasions, threatening his good noodle status and testing their friendship. But in the end, they're able to reconcile their differences by saving the class pet Roger. Another good example of how Mrs. Puff's boating school is nothing like real-life driving school. The fact that the episode has a nice resolution really makes up for Patrick's callous behavior, unlike, once again, I'm With Stupid. Now on to some of my favorite jokes in the episode. Of course, the classic 24 and 25 exchange between SpongeBob and Patrick, which I still think about every time I hear one of those numbers.
Hey, Patrick.
What?
I thought of something funnier than 24.
Let me hear it.
25.
I also love SpongeBob and Patrick trying to fight each other, but end up looking ridiculous in the process.
This is embarrassing.
And the twist at the end that Patrick didn't even realize he was in boating school.
Boating school? I thought this was Spanish class.
So overall, this is another pretty solid episode. Next up is another Season 3 episode, Born Again Crabs. This one I sometimes get mixed up with Squid's Day Off from the previous season, since they both start out with Mr. Krabs having an accident at the Krusty Krab and end up in the hospital. This time, however, Krabs is visited by the Flying Dutchman, which leads to a pretty funny scene where Krabs tries to trick the Dutchman into leaving him alone.
I'm not Eugene Krabs. I'm, Harold. Harold, Flower.
Oh, he's in that room right there.
No, that's Harold Flower's room.
Harold Flower?
But once that doesn't work, the Dutchman warns Mr. Krabs that if he doesn't change his ways, he will end up with him in Davy Jones's locker for all eternity. So Mr. Krabs becomes way more generous and changes his restaurant accordingly. Seeing Mr. Krabs treat his customers and employees way better than he normally would is both funny and also kind of sweet. But just when things are looking up, we suddenly get the really funny reveal that Mr. Krabs thought he was dreaming the whole time. When Krabs finds out this isn't the case, he immediately goes back on all his changes and becomes a cheapskate again in a scene with plenty of great visual gags. My favorite is when he turns off the new TV in the restaurant and then uses the remote to erase the customer's memory of the show. That's such a meme-worthy moment. Anyways, the Flying Dutchman comes back to take Mr. Krabs away, but he ends up taking SpongeBob instead and gives Mr. Krabs 62 cents in return. This leads to another sweet moment when Mr. Krabs realizes that he would rather have SpongeBob back than keep the money.
I didn't learn anything! I lost my best fry cook! I don't want this foul money! I want SpongeBob back! Oh!
It's another moment when we can see a more tender side to Mr. Krabs, proving that he actually cares about SpongeBob. And in another funny twist, the Dutchman returns SpongeBob because he was just that annoying. Not much else to say about this episode, except it's another one with a good balance between funny and heartwarming moments. Now we return to Season 2 with the Fry Cook Games. This episode has such a creative premise, taking place in the titular Fry Cook Games, which are basically the Olympics for fry cooks. Of course, SpongeBob is determined to win all the fry cooking events, but things take an unexpected turn when Patrick ends up competing against him for the chum bucket. In between this plot is just classic gag after classic gag. I love each event SpongeBob and Patrick compete in and how they get increasingly absurd, especially the scene where we only get brief glimpses of each event. Another favorite joke of mine is when Plankton unveils his athlete, who we think is a giant brute, but he's really just carrying Patrick.
This huge guy who's carrying the real contestant, Patrick Star!
This moment is preceded by another unexpectedly funny moment between Plankton and the crowd.
And those of you with weak constitutions may want to leave the stadium. I gotta get out of here! Too late!
Another major highlight of the episode is the climax where SpongeBob and Patrick face off in the final event, which is basically a wrestling match on top of a giant hamburger arena. The whole scene is just jam-packed with hilarious moments. It's so funny just how over the top they go in showing this match, down to SpongeBob and Patrick suddenly becoming ripped. It also has another one of the funniest moments in the episode, when SpongeBob erases part of Patrick's name tag.
No! My name's not Rick!
The resolution is so stupid but funny at the same time, in which SpongeBob and Patrick realizing they're wearing each other's color on their underwear. I mentioned how Rockabye Bivalve was probably making fun of all the SpongeBob and Patrick are gay rumors, but this feels like the moment that really fueled those rumors in the first place. The Fry Cook Games is such a fun time from beginning to end, with a really creative premise and non-stop laughs.
You know, these were white when I bought them.
Up next is another Season 2 episode with a really creative premise, Frankendoodle. This is one of the rare episodes that actually opens with live-action footage. Specifically, an artist working on a boat in the middle of the ocean, played very well by series writer and Plankton's voice actor, Mr. Lawrence. But then the artist drops his pencil in the ocean, and I just love how over the top his reaction is. SpongeBob and Patrick end up finding the pencil, and quickly discover that somehow everything they draw with it comes to life. I'm not exactly sure how that works, but hey, it's SpongeBob. After pranking Squidward a couple times with the pencil, SpongeBob decides to draw a version of himself to prank Squidward again. But in a scene that never fails to crack me up, SpongeBob's plan goes horribly awry.
Squidward's answering the door, and...
The doodle ends up causing so much mayhem that SpongeBob and Patrick end up having to try and stop it. I love the scene where Patrick looks at the doodle and uses it to not so subtly roast SpongeBob.
Those big, bulgy eyes, that square body, those two-buck teeth, and that stupid tie! Oh, but it looks good on you, SpongeBob!
Another really funny sequence is when Doodlebob draws a hole in the ground that he keeps knocking SpongeBob and Patrick into.
You okay, Patrick?
Finland!
Doodlebob is also just generally a really funny character, made even better by his hilarious voice provided by another writer on the show, Paul Tibbett. I also love it when SpongeBob finally erases the doodle and just goes completely insane while doing so.
I am SpongeBob, destroyer of evil!
Take it easy, it's just a drawing.
The only thing weighing this episode down for me is how it basically has two endings. After SpongeBob erases Doodle Bob, it turns out that the Doodle's arm survived, and the arm goes and draws the rest of himself to attack SpongeBob again. SpongeBob ends up defeating him again by trapping him in a book. This is probably an homage to the common horror movie trope of the monster being defeated and then coming back, but to me it just makes the episode run a little too long and causes Doodle's first defeat to feel kinda pointless. But other than that, this is another really funny and creative episode. At number 41, we have The Bully. This episode served as the proper introduction of the character Flats. He actually appeared as a background character in a couple episodes from Season 1, but here he has a full-fledged personality as a bully. Flats is a really fun character, and it kinda sucks that this is the only episode where he has a major role. I think it would have been a pretty fun recurring character. He has a really cool design, and his voice provided by Thomas F. Wilson perfectly suits him.
Hey, that story really speaks to me.
Really? What's it say?
It says now, I'm gonna kick your butt twice as hard.
As for the episode itself, it starts when Flats becomes a new student of Mrs. Puff's boating school, where he immediately makes enemies with SpongeBob despite the fact that SpongeBob did nothing to set him off. The rest of the episode is basically SpongeBob trying to hide from Flats before Flats kicks his butt, and it's really funny how everything seems to be working against SpongeBob. Flats tricks Mrs. Puff into trusting him, and we even find out that he's friends with Patrick in a hilarious scene where Patrick mistakenly calls SpongeBob while trying to order pizza.
Patrick? Is that you?
Yeah, hey Mario. Let me get a large double olive,
Patrick, listen!
Fun fact, as a kid I always thought the scene was supposed to be a reference to the Mario games, since Patrick calls SpongeBob Mario at one point, and I misheard the name Pizza Castle as Peach's Castle.
Hello? Is this Pizza Castle?
Another classic moment is when SpongeBob disguises himself in one of the toilets in the school, and a random character has the perfect reaction for it.
Oh, that's real nice.
I can see why it's become a pretty popular meme in recent years. The episode also has a clever ending, in which SpongeBob finally braces for his beating from Flats, only to discover that he absorbs Flats' blows. This is another classic example of the show making great use out of SpongeBob being a sponge. The Bully is another really fun episode with a highly underrated character.
How many times do we have to teach you this lesson, old man?
I love the young people.
Alright, now we have officially entered the top 40. If this were a music chart, these episodes would be the most popular songs of the week. And we're kicking things off with squirrel jokes from Season 2. In this one, SpongeBob starts a comedy act at the Krusty Krab's open mic night, which looks like a reworked version of the talent show from the Culture Shock episode. At first, SpongeBob seems to be bombing, leading to some really funny reactions from the crowd.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
But once SpongeBob starts making fun of squirrels, he suddenly becomes a hit with the audience. However, Sandy finds the jokes offensive, which causes a rift to form between her and SpongeBob. This is one of the only episodes that actually deals with a serious topic, which in this case is the dangers of making offensive or hurtful jokes. SpongeBob's jokes cause everyone at the town to start treating Sandy like she's stupid, creating very real consequences for SpongeBob's actions. This is a really smart way to show the effects of racism to a young audience without dumbing it down for them. But of course, this is SpongeBob, so it never gets too serious. Honestly, this episode would probably be even higher on the list if it wasn't for an issue with the ending that my brother actually recently pointed out to me. After SpongeBob learns his lesson, he starts making jokes about all the other underwater species like sponges, crabs, and fish.
Soap, what is soap?
This seems to imply that racist jokes are okay as long as you're being racist towards everyone, which I don't think is the smartest resolution for this type of story. I doubt that the writers intended the ending to be read this way, but it does hinder the episode a little bit in my opinion. But even with the questionable ending, I appreciate SpongeBob for trying to tackle a real and serious issue. Next up is another episode with Sandy as a major character, Pressure. This one sees Sandy and SpongeBob stiffly competing with each other, with Sandy always coming out as the victor. But when Sandy realizes that she can't do some of the things that SpongeBob and his friends do since she's a land creature, she dares them to spend some time above the surface. This marks possibly the first time in the series when the characters leave the ocean. unless you count those brief moments in Sandy's rocket when SpongeBob and Sandy go to space. This whole sequence is really the highlight of the episode. In keeping with SpongeBob's usual theme, the surface is portrayed in live action, and SpongeBob, Patrick, Squidward, and Mr. Krabs are represented as little stick puppets. I like how most of the characters look pretty normal, except for Squidward, who looks totally bizarre. The others' reaction to seeing Squidward is also really funny.
Hey, Squid! What?
I always crack up when they run into the seagulls and almost immediately get attacked by them. But even outside the surface sequence, there's some other really funny moments in different scenes. In fact, probably my favorite line in the episode is when everyone sees Sandy take off her underwater suit.
Neptune Preserver!
How long can she stay like that?
I don't know.
Sandy's a girl?
So there's not really a ton to say about this episode, other than it has some really funny moments and great interactions between most of the main characters. Up next is Procrastination, once again from Season 2. This is probably one of the most relatable episodes of SpongeBob. As the title suggests, this one deals with SpongeBob having to write a paper for school and putting it off as much as possible. I think pretty much everyone has run into this problem at some point in their lives, whether it's for school, work, or regular house chores. I know I tend to procrastinate sometimes, including with this video, so I definitely feel for SpongeBob here. His repeated attempts to sit down and finish the paper only to come up with different excuses to take breaks are both really funny and sadly relatable. One of my favorite gags is when it looks like SpongeBob is writing the entire paper, but then it turns out that he just wrote the word "the" in a really ornate fashion.
The.
I also love the idea that the topic of the paper is what not to do at a stoplight. I guess if you have to write a paper for a driving class, there really aren't a lot of other subjects to write about. The episode also has a really entertaining climax. As SpongeBob keeps procrastinating, the environment becomes more and more stressful for him, culminating in objects in his house coming to life and taunting him, and his house catching on fire.
Why? Why did you set me on fire, SpongeBob? Why didn't you just write your essay? Stop wasting time!
But of course, it turns out that all of that was a dream. Normally, I'm not a fan of that trope, but at least only part of the episode was a dream instead of all of it. Anyways, after SpongeBob turns in the paper, it turns out that Mrs. Puff canceled it and had the students go on a field trip to a stoplight instead. This part always confused me as a kid, and honestly, it still kinda confuses me. But it's still a funny way to wrap up a hilarious and relatable episode. Let's go back to Season 3 with No Weenies Allowed. This is the famous Salty Spittoon episode, in which SpongeBob tries to get into the bar by proving that he's tough. Right off the bat, the episode starts with some really funny jokes when SpongeBob and Sandy face each other in a karate match. I especially love Tom Kenny's delivery on this line.
Oh, I get it. She's Sandy. That's her name. She's also covered in yes.
But the episode really starts when SpongeBob actually comes across the Salty Spittoon, whose bouncer is another memorable one-off character named Reg, with once again a really funny voice performance by Thomas Wilson.
Welcome to the Salty Spittoon. How tough are you?
How tough am I?
Wow.
What follows is a series of hilarious scenes as SpongeBob tries and fails to get into the bar. He keeps getting sent to Super Weenie Hut Jr., a name I just love, which for some inexplicable reason has a robot working at the bar. Eventually, SpongeBob asks Patrick for help by staging a fight with him, leading to easily my favorite moment in the episode and one of the funniest scenes in the show, period. Firstly, I love how Patrick starts by playing along with SpongeBob until he gets legit mad when SpongeBob calls him Tubby.
Tubby? Nobody calls me Tubby!
We then get some amazing physical comedy when Patrick proceeds to beat himself up. I've seen videos of people playing this scene on their TV and act like they're actually beating up Patrick, and it's just amazing to watch. But even on its own, this scene never fails to make me lose it. It's just so stupid that you can't help but love it. And to top it off, this is what gets SpongeBob into the Salty Spittoon, only for him to immediately slip on an ice cube and get knocked out. Which is totally on brand with SpongeBob, and a great way to end a hilarious episode. Now we'll move on to one of the first episodes of Season 3, My Pretty Seahorse. This is one of those episodes that doesn't sound like it would be that entertaining, but it still manages to work somehow. In this case, SpongeBob notices that a seahorse has been eating out of his garden, but eventually decides to keep it and give it the name Mystery, though the other names he comes up for it are pretty funny as well.
Now that I think about it, she's also very graceful and majestic. Perhaps I should name her Grace, or Majesty, or Debbie.
By the way, SpongeBob always refers to Mystery as a she, but does he actually know its gender? I don't know, I'll just keep saying it just to be safe. Anyways, the episode sort of turns into the old hiding the pet narrative when SpongeBob brings Mystery to work and tries to keep it out of Mr. Krabs' sight. While this type of story can be kind of overdone, this episode definitely makes up for it with some really funny moments. The one that always sticks out to me is when Mystery is outside the Krusty Krab and a couple of guys think it's a mechanical horse.
I can't find the coin slot! Here it is!
I also love the small but effective moment when Squidward asks SpongeBob about the missing order.
Did you look under the tray?
Oh, no, I didn't. Sorry.
Eventually, Mr. Krabs finds out about Mystery and forces SpongeBob to let the horse go, which is kind of a sad way to end the episode. But in true SpongeBob fashion, it ends with a hilarious joke which is probably my favorite of the whole episode.
Just get out of here, you stupid, dumb animal!
Overall, this is just a cute little episode with some really funny gags. Now let's look at the very last episode to air during Season 2, Sandy, SpongeBob, and the Worm. This episode is one of those stories that's so weird that it could only take place in the SpongeBob universe. It starts out with a creature called the Alaskan Bullworm attacking Bikini Bottom and destroying everything in sight. In a way, it's kind of similar to the nematodes from the Home Sweet Pineapple episode, since both creatures tend to eat random objects. The episode also makes the clever decision not to show what the creature looks like, instead having us rely on the character's descriptions, kind of like a classic monster movie. In fact, the scene where everyone's gathered in the Krusty Krab has a really funny reference to Jaws.
You got a bathroom in this place?
In the back.
Thanks.
Speaking of which, this whole scene is full of hilarious moments. One is Mr. Krabs' crazy rant when Sandy offers to take care of the worm and everyone's concerned expressions afterward.
I'd rather that worm come in here right now and eat you all alive!
But maybe my favorite joke in the episode is when Patrick suggests they move Bikini Bottom somewhere else, which ends up having an amazing payoff.
We should take Bikini Bottom and push it somewhere else! Push!
But the actual story doesn't kick in until Sandy decides to go after the worm, despite SpongeBob warning her about how scary it is. She goes into what she thinks is a cave, but it turns out to be the worm's mouth. After hearing so much about how dangerous this worm is, it's really satisfying to finally see what it looks like. SpongeBob and Sandy eventually get away from the worm, which features the darkest joke in the episode and maybe one of the darkest in the whole series.
S for SpongeBob, or S for Sandy. That way they can identify our body.
And like I said, the episode ends with a hilarious payoff to Patrick's plan from earlier. It's the perfect joke to end this weird but really entertaining episode. Alright, now it's time to talk about the infamous banned SpongeBob episode, Midlife Crustacean. As of now, the episode is no longer available on streaming and does not air in reruns, meaning that there is no way to officially watch this episode.
Unless you have the DVD like me.
As the title suggests, this episode starts with Mr. Krabs experiencing a bit of a midlife crisis, and he starts to think that he's getting too old. I just love the song that plays at the beginning. It's not even subtle with how much it's roasting Mr. Krabs.
Look at yourself, old man. You got multiple chins 'cause you're old.
To make himself feel younger, Krabs decides to hang out with SpongeBob and Patrick for a night on the town. But as the night goes on, Krabs begins to realize that the two are actually much lamer than he thought. This leads to probably the funniest sequence in the episode, with SpongeBob and Patrick leading Mr. Krabs in safe, non-offensive activities while constantly asking him if he can feel it. I especially love this little bit with Patrick.
I'm feeling it, SpongeBob.
Patrick, that's not a ride.
Get off of me!
When Mr. Krabs almost walks out on them, SpongeBob and Patrick change his mind by inviting him to a panty raid. And now we're getting into why this episode got banned. See, the panty raid literally involves going into a random girl's house and finding her underwear. While I personally think banning the episode over this was a little extreme, I absolutely get why Nickelodeon has the problem with it. The whole scene feels really adult, even by SpongeBob standards. It feels more like something you would see in Ren and Stimpy or Rocko's Modern Life. It also feels pretty out of character for SpongeBob and Patrick to do something so perverted. But I guess that's part of the joke. The two spend so long doing safe and lame activities that this comes completely out of nowhere. But either way, this is still a great episode despite its controversial nature. At number 33, we have Squiddium Returns, which I just realized is one of only 2 episodes from the classic era where Squiddium was prominently featured. He would go on to appear more often in the later episodes, but I always forget how little he appeared in the pre-movie ones. Anyways, this time Squidward lies to Squiddium that he owns a 5-star restaurant, and now he has to completely renovate the Krusty Krab to make it look elegant. The results, of course, are hilariously chaotic. SpongeBob struggles to learn the rules of fine dining, Mr. Krabs turns out to be a terrible cook, and Patrick is, well, Patrick. There are too many hilarious moments here to count, but out of some of my favorites, I love how Patrick just appears out of nowhere and pretends he's in the army, and his weenie line always cracks me up.
Can you take hats in a dignified and sophisticated manner?
You mean like a weenie? Okay. May I take your hat, sir? May I take your hat, sir? May I...
Alright, I've heard enough. You've got the job.
There's also Mr. Krabs telling Squidward that he was the head chef on the SS Gourmet when it was actually the SS Diarrhea, which leads to a really funny reveal of what the appetizer actually is.
Holy fish paste! What is that?
That's the appetizer!
But my favorite moments are when we get a look inside SpongeBob's brain when he tries to forget everything except fine dining and breathing. It's basically a big office full of little SpongeBobs, and we get my absolute favorite exchange of the episode.
You don't pay me. We don't even exist. We're just a clever visual metaphor used to personify the abstract concept of thought. One more crack like that and you're out of here. No, please! I have 3 kids!
And believe it or not, but this tactic actually works, and SpongeBob is able to turn the entire Krusty Krab into a luxury restaurant. Oh, and how could I forget the scene where Squidward first bumps into Squirnium, and we get a moment where we maybe learn a little too much about Squidward.
Don't be intimidated, Squidward. Try to imagine him in his underwear. Oh no, he's hot!
Like I said, this episode is full of great gags, though I can't help but feel bad for Squidward when the whole plan ends up falling apart and Squirnium rubs it in his face. But still, a really funny episode from beginning to end. Our next episode is Clams. Based on the name and title card, one would assume that this whole episode is a parody of Jaws, and while there are some blatant references to it, it's actually quite an original episode. It starts when Mr. Krabs makes his $1 millionth at the Krusty Krab, so to celebrate, he takes SpongeBob and Squidward on a clam fishing trip. Kinda random that they're looking specifically for clams, but I guess it makes more sense in the context of the show than, you know, trying to catch actual fish. But after a freak accident caused by SpongeBob, Mr. Krabs' daughter gets eaten by a giant clam, and he sets SpongeBob and Squidward to work trying to catch it. This is when the episode takes a somewhat dark turn as Mr. Krabs basically goes insane trying to catch the clam. While it is a bit dark, it's also really funny seeing Mr. Krabs have such a huge breakdown over $1.
Squidward, he's lost something near and dear to him, haven't you?
Look again.
I also like the running gag of the suspenseful music attracting the clam, which is probably the most obvious reference to Jaws in the whole episode.
There you are, you stinking bilge rats! Stop playing that music! Stop it, please!
Another favorite moment of mine is when they trick Mr. Krabs into thinking they got the $1 back, and subsequently revealing that SpongeBob kissed the $1 with blue lipstick. I just find it so funny how both SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs know exactly what kind of lipstick it is.
This is an ordinary $1 that's been crumpled up, torn slightly, soaked in a lagoon, and kissed with coral blue #2 semi-gloss lipstick.
Actually, it's coral blue #2.
Yeah, not much else to say about this episode. It's just classic SpongeBob. We now return to Season 2 with Artist Unknown. This episode features some of the angriest moments of Squidward in the entire classic era, and it all stems from him trying to teach SpongeBob about art. Squidward actually wanted to start a professional art class at the rec center, but in a hilarious twist, the people he thought were his students actually thought they were in a cooking class, and SpongeBob was the only one who signed up.
SpongeBob, in art class? Wait! This is cooking! Come back!
This is one of those episodes that isn't focused on an actual story as much as showing a series of gags, but thankfully most of them are really funny. One of the biggest highlights is all of the artwork that SpongeBob and Squidward make, which show a large variety of styles with varying quality. My personal favorite is Squidward's painting Bold and Brash, and believe it or not, I actually have a physical canvas of this painting. Please, ladies, one at a time. The main conflict of this episode comes from how SpongeBob seems to be naturally amazing at art, which of course makes Squidward jealous. One of the most memorable moments for me is when SpongeBob draws a perfect circle by drawing a realistic head and then erasing all the details.
Well, first I draw this head, then I erased some of the more detailed features, and 1, 2, 3, a circle thingy.
Squidward eventually kicks SpongeBob out, and right afterwards a prestigious art collector comes in. As far as I know, this is the only time this character appeared in the series, but he makes quite a memorable impression with all of his amazing roasts at Squidward, complete with a hilarious voice performance by D. Bradley Baker.
How about this one? I call it Bold and Brash.
More like belongs in the trash.
When the collector sees a sculpture SpongeBob made and loves it, Squidward tries to take credit for it, but when it gets destroyed, he has to get SpongeBob to make another one. This teaches an important lesson about how you should never take credit for other people's work, which surprisingly a lot of people nowadays still need to learn. Anyways, this tactic blows up in Squidward's face when SpongeBob tries to follow Squidward's advice and make terrible art, leading to one of Squidward's funniest tantrums in the series. So while this episode isn't super plot heavy, it does have hilarious and memorable jokes and a subtle message about giving proper credit to artists. We're kicking off the top 30 with the first season 1 episode we've looked at for a while, Walking Small. I find this to be one of the most overlooked episodes from the classic era, and it's honestly one of my favorites from the first season. In this one, Plankton tries to take control of Goo Lagoon by using SpongeBob to drive everyone away. I feel like the first season had a lot more episodes where it was mostly SpongeBob and Plankton interacting with each other. Most episodes involving Plankton center around him trying to steal the formula, so it's nice when a Plankton episode changes things up a bit like this one. While Plankton is really funny in this episode, to me it's SpongeBob himself who really steals the show. Right off the bat, SpongeBob's first appearance is one of the funniest and most random things in the whole episode. It's just inexplicably hilarious.
Stepping on the beat, stepping on the beat, stepping on the beat, stepping on the beat.
I also love when Plankton is first talking to SpongeBob about being more assertive, and the whole time SpongeBob is just going ham on this ice cream cone, barely listening to what Plankton is saying.
SpongeBob? SpongeBob!
Yeah?
The whole joke of the episode is that SpongeBob is just too innocent to do the mean things Plankton wants him to do, which leads to some really funny misunderstandings, like the whole scene with the metal detector.
Tell that guy you know karate and you'll tie him in a knot if you don't get your metal detector back.
Hey! I'm gonna tie your shoe if you don't give that back!
I also love when Plankton goes inside SpongeBob and insults the guy who took his ice cream. All while SpongeBob just has this huge smile on his face.
Surrender that ice cream cone, or every waking moment for you will become a swirling torrent of pain and misery!
But eventually, SpongeBob does come to understand what Plankton is talking about, leading to one of the rare times when we see SpongeBob being a jerk. And unlike episodes like The Great Snail Race, it's just so funny to watch. But eventually, SpongeBob realizes that Plankton was using him, leading to another one of my favorite lines.
You used me for land development!
The ending is also surprisingly heartwarming, in which SpongeBob makes up for what he did by being kind to the beachgoers. It definitely makes up for all the horrible things he did earlier, and it's a great way to wrap up a hilarious and touching episode. Going back to Season 3, let's take a look at another Plankton-centric episode, Plankton's Army. What makes this episode stand out is that we actually get to see Plankton's family. This was probably the first episode to really explore Plankton's origins, and one of the few episodes in general to do that. Plankton comes into contact with them when he decides to build an army to finally take the Krabby Patty formula. But in a really funny scene, Plankton has a hard time getting recruits.
And I know just how to speak their language. Felicitations, malefactors!
Afterwards, Plankton decides to contact his family, who he expects to be geniuses like him, but they turn out to be a bunch of country bumpkins. I just love some of the names that Plankton's relatives have.
Of course you remember Zeke, Rufus, Jeep, Billy Bob, Billy Jim, Billy, Banana Fanta, Philly.
It's also funny when we see Karen's reaction to finding out that Plankton's first name is Sheldon, which nowadays just makes me think of the Big Bang Theory.
Sheldon.
Yes, that's my first name.
Sheldon!
Will you please?
When Plankton and his family finally invade the Krusty Krab, it's actually one of the only times in the series when Plankton actually comes close to getting his goal of stealing the formula. But in one of the highlights of the episode for me, he finds out that one of the ingredients is actually, well...
Plankton?
I warned you.
This turns out to be a false page that Mr. Krabs inserted, but Plankton and his family's reactions are still really funny. My favorite part of this scene, and maybe the whole episode, is when it shows the last member of the Plankton family to leave.
Hey, why ain't you running?
Well, I can't read.
Get out of here.
Overall, this is a pretty fun episode that gives us some more insight into Plankton's roots. Up next is Gary Takes a Bath from Season 2. This is actually the shortest episode from the classic era, clocking in at only 6.5 minutes. You'd think that would knock a point against this episode, but the short runtime actually works in its favor. It doesn't waste any time on jokes or overstay its welcome. The episode has an extremely simple premise of SpongeBob trying to give Gary a bath, but Gary won't cooperate. What follows is essentially a series of gags involving SpongeBob trying to force Gary to take his bath, to no avail. While not every gag in the episode is a home run, a majority of them are still really funny. Some of my favorites include the subliminal messages scene, which is just completely inexplicable.
I am now going to assault your mind with subliminal messages. Sorry you had to see that.
The scene where Mr. Krabs comes in for a few seconds.
I've got a crisp dollar bill for the next fella to take a bath in this house.
And one of the most adult jokes in all of SpongeBob that took me a really long time to finally get.
Look, doubloons! Don't drop them.
Because this episode has almost no story, there's not really much to say about it without simply listing all the funniest parts. But all I can say is that Gary Takes a Bath is a short but sweet experience. Now let's look at one of the darkest episodes of the whole series, Nasty Patty. This episode does a really good job of setting up a distinct atmosphere, starting on a dark and stormy night while the narrator tells us the story of how SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs thought they killed the health inspector. To explain a little further, the Krusty Krab gets a special visit from the health inspector, and Mr. Krabs obviously wants to make a good impression. As a side note, one reason this episode is so special to me is that my dad was actually a health inspector for a long time, so this episode always makes me think of him. Anyways, at first, Krabs and SpongeBob are very hospitable towards the inspector, until they see a news report of a guy pretending to be a health inspector to get free food. Mr. Krabs assumes their health inspector is this guy, so he and SpongeBob get revenge by creating the titular Nasty Patty. As the name implies, this patty is absolutely revolting, though still not quite as gross as anything in the Splendor episode. When they give him the patty, the inspector chokes on a fly and goes unconscious, leading SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs to think that the patty killed him. This is when the episode starts to get really dark, as SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs try to dispose of the body. Of course, we know that the inspector isn't really dead, but if you look at this from SpongeBob and Krabs' perspective, it becomes extremely morbid. Even the visuals reflect this by having a more dreary and less vibrant color scheme than usual. It's almost like something from one of those shitty SpongeBob Lost Episode creepypastas. Eventually, SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs try to hide the body in the restaurant from 2 police officers, leading to some of the funniest moments in the episode. My personal favorite is this line from SpongeBob, which my brother and I still quote to this day.
The dark deed you requested is done, sir.
Of course, everything turns out okay when they realize that the health inspector wasn't really dead, but it doesn't make the rest of the episode any less dark. But despite its dark tone, this is still a funny and memorable episode from Season 3. Our next episode is another one from Season 3, Crabborg. Like I mentioned earlier, I always get this episode mixed up with Imitation Krabs from Season 2. I've always thought it was so funny how in this episode, SpongeBob thinks Mr. Krabs is replaced by a robot, but in the other episode, Krabs really was replaced by a robot and SpongeBob has no idea. This episode's story starts with SpongeBob getting scared by a robot movie on TV. This movie always cracks me up as it's literally just a live-action guy being chased by a cheesy-looking robot. SpongeBob becomes paranoid of robots coming after him and starts to believe that Mr. Krabs was replaced by a robot. The whole sequence of SpongeBob starting to believe this is just pure gold, from Mr. Krabs' discussion with the radio DJ,
Bob. Beep. Boo Boo Bob.
To the dance he does. To finally coming out with burning eyes, batteries, and taunts, which they set up in the funniest way possible. I also love the robot test SpongeBob uses Squidward for by showing how robots can't laugh, cry, or love. It just shows how much of a jerk Mr. Krabs often is to Squidward.
I just wanted to tell you that Squidward loves you.
Get back to work, Mr. Squidward.
Eventually, Squidward believes SpongeBob's theory, leading to another funny moment when they try to warn everyone.
Attention, everyone! Run for your lives! Robots have taken over the world! Our world!
Their interrogation of Mr. Krabs is also really funny, especially with how SpongeBob keeps messing it up.
SpongeBob, you gotta ask him a question first.
Oh yeah. What color is my underwear?
But of course, they eventually realize that Mr. Krabs is not a robot, leading to the hilarious reveal that the movie SpongeBob saw ended with the robots just being everyone's imagination.
The movie? Oh, yeah, the ending was great! Turns out there weren't any robots after all. It was just their imagination.
SpongeBob acts like this is a great ending, but if a movie actually tried to do this, it would be the stupidest ending ever. It's as bad as the whole "it was just a dream" cliche. So between this and the other robot episode of SpongeBob, this one is easily my favorite, with a hilarious premise and equally hilarious gags.
Hey, Patrick.
What?
I thought of something funnier than 24.
Let me hear it.
25.
Going back to Season 2, let's take a look at Squidville. This is another episode that serves as a really interesting look into Squidward's psyche. In this one, Squidward finally decides to move away from SpongeBob and Patrick and into Tentacle Acres, a neighborhood full of squids like him. At first, Squidward feels like he's in heaven, but soon comes to realize that since everything in the town is perfect, it makes his life a lot more boring. This is another episode that shows no matter how much Squidward hates SpongeBob and Patrick, he also needs them in his life. Without them, his daily routine becomes dull and unfulfilling. SpongeBob and Patrick provide him with the sense of fun that he desperately needs. This can serve as a really good lesson not just for Squidward, but the adults watching.
They might as well rename this town Squidward's Paradise. Or perhaps Too Much Paradise.
But as deep as this episode's story is, this is still SpongeBob we're talking about, so there's plenty of hilarious moments as well. The opening scene of SpongeBob and Patrick playing with the reef blowers has some great visual gags, and is a nice callback to the second episode of the series. Really, SpongeBob and Patrick provide most of the funniest moments in this episode. I really like the part where SpongeBob calls Squidward and he sounds garbled over the phone, only to reveal that he and Patrick are actually speaking in gibberish. And some of my favorite lines come from the part towards the end when the two are trying to find Squidward in Tentacle Acres.
Are you Squidward? That's okay, take your time.
It's also really funny watching the other residents of the neighborhood giving Squidward the same pretentious, naughty attitude he gives to everyone else.
I've heard better comebacks from a turkey sandwich. Get a life!
This place is better than I expected.
All in all, this is both a really fun and surprisingly poignant episode.
24!
Up next is another one of my favorite Season 1 episodes, Fun, which funnily enough is another one that centers on SpongeBob and Plankton. This was also one of the episodes featured on that Sponge Buddies VHS, so this one has a particularly special place in my heart. What makes this episode stand out is how it was one of the first to show Plankton in a sympathetic light. Specifically, it involves SpongeBob trying to become friends with Plankton to try and change him for the better. This seems to work at first, with the two doing all kinds of fun things together. This of course leads to what is probably the highlight of the episode, and that is the titular song, Fun. Out of all the original songs in SpongeBob, this has to be one of the catchiest. It's just such a happy and optimistic song that you can't help but love it.
F is for friends who do stuff together. U is for you and me. N is for anywhere and anytime at all.
Down here in the deep blue sea.
But of course, SpongeBob and Plankton's new friendship starts to frustrate Mr. Krabs, who's convinced that Plankton's change of heart is just a ruse to get the formula. For a show that's almost entirely focused on comedy, this is a surprisingly dramatic conflict that creates some real tension between SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs. This comes to a head in the climactic scene where SpongeBob and Plankton go to the movies, and SpongeBob realizes that Plankton secretly stole a Krabby Patty. Between the background music and the way SpongeBob and Plankton tearfully argue with each other, this is a shockingly emotional moment. And Tom Kenny and Mr. Lawrence seriously brought their A games in terms of their voice acting.
Tell me! What?
Alright, it's true! I tricked you to get the Krabby Patty! But then you showed me friendship! And now I realize that's all I ever really wanted.
In the end though, it turns out that Plankton really was tricking SpongeBob the whole time and never had a change of heart. While this ending is admittedly a bit of a cop-out, the way Plankton suddenly switches on SpongeBob is pretty funny.
Really?
No, not really. Being evil is too much fun.
Speaking of which, let's talk about some of the comedic highlights. The opening scene where SpongeBob is chasing Plankton is full of great physical comedy and visual gags. And when the other Bikini Bottomites come in to tease Plankton, Squidward delivers a criminally underrated line that is probably the funniest in the entire episode.
How does it feel to be the most hated thing in Bikini Bottom, Plankton? It hurts, doesn't it? I know!
With great comedy and surprisingly dramatic moments, fun really is, well, a fun episode. Going back to Season 2, let's take a look at Squid's Day Off. We're going to see a lot of episodes higher up on the list that center on Squidward, which makes sense as he is my favorite character on the show, and this is one of the most memorable ones in my opinion. In a way, the start of the episode is kind of similar to the beginning of Born Again Krabs from Season 3, with Mr. Krabs getting injured on the job and getting sent to the hospital. The part where Mr. Krabs' arms fall off is another one my brother and I quote a lot.
Oh no, not again!
Anyways, Mr. Krabs entrusts Squidward with watching the Krusty Krab while he's gone, which Squidward sees as a perfect opportunity to take the rest of the day off and leave everything to SpongeBob. But as time goes on, Squidward becomes increasingly paranoid that SpongeBob will do something to mess up the restaurant if left alone. This is another episode that serves as an interesting look at Squidward's psyche, but it takes a bit of a different angle than most other episodes. Seeing Squidward slowly have a mental breakdown imagining scenarios of SpongeBob destroying the Krusty Krab is both kind of dark and really funny. It's this increasing tension inside of Squidward that makes the episode really entertaining. I love his daydream about SpongeBob not being able to make change.
Hey, SpongeBob, could you give me change for a quarter?
No problem! Here you go!
Hey.
And SpongeBob's line when Squidward imagines him in a mirror.
Now, repeat after me. You will not go back to the Krusty Krab.
I will destroy the Krusty Krab.
But the episode really becomes memorable during the climax when Squidward goes completely insane and takes on a hilariously grotesque appearance. In fact, this design for Squidward is so funny that it later reappeared in a post-movie episode, Suction Cup Symphony, which by the way is one of my favorite post-movie SpongeBob episodes. After a particularly surreal sequence in which Squidward hallucinates SpongeBob in his own bathtub, Squidward starts running back to the Krusty Krab completely naked. Everyone's reactions to seeing Squidward like this are hilarious, especially Mr. Krabs.
Get plenty of rest, and if things don't seem right, come back.
Thanks, Doc.
SpongeBob, you can't beat me!
Another highlight of the episode for me is when Squidward starts bragging to SpongeBob about catching him, and as he goes on he just realizes how absolutely crazy he sounds. Again, Roger Bumpus' delivery really sells this scene.
And you and I, and then you swam down the drain and beat me to the Krusty Krab.
And at the end it turns out that they forgot to put up the open sign out front, meaning that everyone could have taken the day off, leading to another one of my favorite visuals in the episode, and a great way to cap off a hilarious episode. Next up is Something Smells, which is actually the very first episode of Season 2, and if you ask me, it was a great way to kick off the season. The episode starts with SpongeBob making a disgusting sundae made out of ketchup, onions, and a peanut plant, including the dirt. The YouTube channel Binging with Babish actually made the sundae in real life, though I probably wouldn't recommend trying it yourself, especially considering what happens to SpongeBob in this episode. What I'm referring to is that when SpongeBob eats the sundae, it makes his breath smell absolutely rancid, which is obvious to everyone except him. Everyone's reactions to his breath are so funny, and provide some of the best visual gags of the whole series. SpongeBob pretty quickly figures out that something is wrong, and he ends up finding Patrick in a scene that's just so random that it always makes me laugh.
And now, giant piles of bubble gum? Oh, what next?
Hi, SpongeBob.
After explaining his problem to Patrick, he comes up with the hilarious conclusion that SpongeBob is ugly. This is another early example of Patrick being kind of a bad friend to SpongeBob, but his subtle roasts about SpongeBob's appearance are brutally funny, especially when he tries to cheer SpongeBob up with the ugly barnacle story, which is one of my favorite Patrick moments of all time.
Once there was an ugly barnacle. He was so ugly that everyone died. The end.
Patrick finally gets SpongeBob to build his confidence by screaming, "I'm ugly and I'm proud" from his roof, leading to one of my favorite one-liners from Squidward.
Is that what he calls it?
SpongeBob and Patrick then decide to go to the movies, leading to some more really funny over-the-top reactions from the other moviegoers, with my favorite being this one.
Excuse me, sir. I hope my horrible ugliness won't be a distraction to you.
Not at all, boy!
When SpongeBob's confidence is once again shaken, Patrick admonishes the crowd in another scene that always cracks me up. Patrick just gets so needlessly angry on SpongeBob's behalf.
Look at it! Look at it! Look at it! I want all of you to look at it!
Later, Patrick tries some of SpongeBob's sundae, which apparently he's been carrying around with him this whole time. Seriously, how did he not notice the smell coming from it? And of course, Patrick runs into the same problem as SpongeBob, leading him to believe that he somehow caught SpongeBob's ugly. And we get some more great roasts from him.
But I was one of the beautiful people. Now look at me. I'm almost as ugly as you.
Finally, SpongeBob and Patrick figure out that their breath stinks, leading them to celebrate. There's not much else to say about this episode. It's one of the more well-known classic episodes, and for good reason. It's just non-stop laughs from beginning to end. Next, we'll be looking at what I consider to be one of the most underappreciated classic episodes, Missing Identity. Like the Nasty Patty episode, this one does a really good job of establishing a unique atmosphere right at the start. It sort of begins like a noir film would, opening on a diner during a dark and rainy day, with few people there other than SpongeBob. There's something about this whole setting that I've always found so cozy, especially the background music they use. It's called East Side Story, and I highly recommend checking it out. Anyway, SpongeBob begins telling everyone the story of how he lost his name tag. It's so funny how SpongeBob just starts the story out of nowhere and keeps telling it despite everyone else being clearly uninterested.
Oh no, I lost my pen.
You could borrow mine.
Thanks.
I lost something once.
SpongeBob's story begins on a hectic morning for him as he gets ready for work. Once he gets there, he discovers that he lost his name tag. To most people, this wouldn't be a big deal, but since SpongeBob takes his job so seriously, he practically has a panic attack over it. I really like the running gag of SpongeBob hyperventilating. Things get even worse when Mr. Krabs announces a surprise employee inspection later that day, meaning that SpongeBob has to find his name tag as soon as possible. This leads to probably the funniest sequence of the whole episode, with Patrick helping SpongeBob retrace his steps at home. We basically keep getting the scene at the beginning of the story over and over again. I'm normally not a huge fan of repetitious jokes, but for some reason I just find this so funny. My favorite part is when Patrick keeps messing up and calls him SpongeBoob at one point, and the following scene is almost like something out of a blooper reel.
The SpongeBoob! Who's SpongeBoob? I said SpongeBoob! Again, sorry people.
Eventually, SpongeBob keeps retracing his steps until he starts looking through a dumpster that some guys threw him into. As a side note, I've always found it so funny that SpongeBob just casually drops this information without any further explanation or context.
Oh, and these two guys threw me in the dumpster. Good one, guys!
While looking, Patrick discovers that SpongeBob is actually wearing his shirt backwards and had his name tag all on. But of course it takes him a while to get that information across, and another really funny scene.
Hey, SpongeBob.
Not now, Patrick.
I know where your name tag is.
Where?
I can't remember.
Also, if you look closely, you can tell that SpongeBob has his shirt backwards throughout the whole episode since his shirt collar is missing. Despite how much I love this episode, I really don't hear it brought up often when discussing the best of early SpongeBob. But if you haven't seen this episode, or it's been a while since you have, I think you should definitely check it out. Now we're getting into the top 20, and let me tell you, this is when shit gets serious. I love almost every episode on this list, but now we're getting into my all-time favorites, the episodes I never get tired of no matter how many times I watch them. Granted, you can say that about most of the episodes here, but it's especially true for the top 20. And we're kicking off the top 20 with I Had an Accident from Season 3. Man, this has to be one of, if not the craziest episode from the classic era, but I absolutely love it. The episode starts with SpongeBob, Patrick, and Sandy snowboarding on Sand Mountain. Right away, we're hit with the gut-busting hilarious gag where we see Patrick crash and break into a bunch of pieces, only to reveal that it's actually a video game he's playing, and then he actually crashes and they play the exact same animation. It's probably the funniest opening scene of the whole show. We also get some funny bits with SpongeBob's turn down the mountain, especially his impression of Squidward.
Everybody's an idiot except for me. Well, it's true.
But soon SpongeBob starts careening down the mountain while Patrick and Sandy have to help him, leading to one of my favorite Patrick lines.
Don't you have to be stupid somewhere else?
Not until 4.
And he gets another hilarious line when SpongeBob falls and breaks his butt.
Oh, that's gotta hurt.
Do it again, I wasn't looking.
After his accident, SpongeBob's butt is repaired at the hospital, but he's warned that if it happens again, it's the iron butt.
Oh man, it itches.
SpongeBob then becomes terrified of hurting his butt again, leading to some more really funny moments when we see opportunities for him to have another accident. My favorite is a 7-mile spanking machine.
Is this where the line starts?
Eventually, SpongeBob decides that in order to avoid injury, he can't leave his house. This starts the true plot of the episode, in which Sandy and Patrick try to help him come outside. Really, Patrick gets more laughs than probably anyone else in the episode. He has so many funny lines that it's impossible to list them all. I also like SpongeBob keeping himself company with inanimate objects.
Take it away, Penny!
That Penny has the most beautiful voice.
After Sandy and Patrick can't quell SpongeBob's fears, they resort to dressing Patrick up as a gorilla so SpongeBob can come out and defeat him. This is when the episode truly goes off the rails. See, while this is happening, another Patrick appears, which turns out to be a real, live-action gorilla in disguise. Whoever was in this gorilla suit must have been having the time of their life while filming this. The gorilla's antics are so funny to watch, and the cheapness of the costume only adds to the comedy. This finally gets SpongeBob to come outside, only to immediately get attacked by the gorilla. Finally, SpongeBob asks why a gorilla is underwater at all, and we finally hear the gorilla speak with a very funny performance by Frank Welker.
Well, it's funny you should, see, George, they're onto it!
The gorilla takes its horse, which is clearly two guys in another costume, and rides off in the sunset. This is, without a doubt, the weirdest ending of any episode. And the weirdness is only emphasized when we see a family watching the show in confusion and turning it off. This is the prime example of the writers clearly having no idea how to end the episode, so they just went with whatever random BS they could think of. But this only makes the episode even more hilarious, and is the reason why I'll always keep coming back to it. Up next is Club SpongeBob. This is yet another episode featured on my old Sponge Buddies VHS, so I have a lot of fond memories of this one. As the title implies, SpongeBob and Patrick start a club in a treehouse that randomly popped up in their neighborhood. The tree had never been shown before or since, but that's SpongeBob for you. When Squidward finds out about this, he's uninterested at first, but in true Squidward fashion, he comes in anyway. But once Squidward starts getting annoyed by the two, he begins climbing down, which creates a sort of slingshot effect that launches the treehouse into the kelp forest. This is the kind of insane setup that could only work in a cartoon like SpongeBob. By the way, I've always found the kelp forest to be a really cool location, but to my knowledge it never really appeared in the show again. It was even featured in the video game Battle for Bikini Bottom. Anyways, now Squidward finds himself stranded with SpongeBob and Patrick. In other words, his worst nightmare. At the same time, SpongeBob and Patrick have a toy called the Magic Conch, which is basically a talking magic 8-ball answering yes or no questions. It's funny how SpongeBob and Patrick take it so seriously and treat it like it's an all-knowing god or something.
Magic Conch Show? Will I ever get married?
Maybe someday.
This was clearly inspired by Lord of the Flies, and funnily enough, when I read that book in English class in high school, our class actually got to watch this episode. It was one of the best things to happen to me in school. Squidward, of course, does not take it seriously, but by some miracle, it actually leads to SpongeBob and Patrick getting much better luck than Squidward. In one of the most memorable parts of the episode, an entire picnic falls out of a plane and directly in front of the two. When Squidward tries to join them, the conch won't let him eat anything.
Can't you say anything else but no?
Try asking again.
Can I have something to eat?
No.
Out of all the classic SpongeBob episodes, this one is probably the most brutal on Squidward, but his reactions make it all worth it. At the end, everyone appears to be saved by a ranger, only to find out that he also worships the magic conch. The ensuing scene in Squidward's breakdown just prior to the Ranger showing up really drive home how much he suffered in this episode.
Squidward, are you alright?
Maybe we should ask the show if he's okay.
Normally I don't like these types of stories, and the post-movie episodes were often needlessly harsh on Squidward, but this episode is just so funny that I don't really care. Club SpongeBob always makes me laugh and gives me a lot of nostalgia. Up next is yet another Season 3 episode, Idiot Box. Yeah, Season 3 might be my favorite, it's so good. Really, what is there to say about this episode that hasn't been said already? It's one of the most famous episodes of the whole show, and for good reason. It has a brilliantly simple premise and makes full use of it with some of the best character-based comedy in the show. The premise in question is this. SpongeBob and Patrick find a big box, go inside it, and pretend to go on amazing adventures. Squidward finds this pathetic at first, but when he starts actually hearing the stuff they're pretending to do, he becomes intrigued. This leads to one of the more famous moments of the show, which is SpongeBob teaching Squidward about
imagination.
Squidward tries to prove them wrong, but only becomes obsessed with how to do what SpongeBob and Patrick are doing. By the way, one of my favorite scenes is when they're playing Mountain Climbing Adventure and Patrick just goes absolutely crazy for no reason.
Take it easy, Patrick. You've got to acclimate.
Yeah, I'll take it easy when I'm dead. I'm chicken heads with Neptune. Woo! Excelsior!
And it ends in a darkly hilarious way with the two getting caught in an avalanche.
SpongeBob, my legs are frozen solid. You'll have to cut them off with a saw.
No, Patrick, I can't do that.
Why not?
Because I already cut off my own arms.
No!
Squidward tries going into a box in his own house which has a sombrero in it, leading to a small line that always makes me laugh, especially with how Roger Bumpus delivers it.
Why haven't I worn this yet?
Finally, Squidward sneaks into the box while SpongeBob and Patrick are asleep. While there, he appears to finally be using his imagination, only to reveal that he's actually being driven away by a garbage truck. So, was everything Squidward hearing real, or was he actually using his imagination without realizing it? I've talked a lot about how Squidward secretly wants to join in on SpongeBob and Patrick's fun, and this episode is one of the best examples of that. Not only is it full of funny moments, but it also teaches us the importance of
imagination.
All right, fine.
Now let's look at yet another Season 3 episode, As Seen on TV. Right away, this episode has an intriguing setup, as Mr. Krabs has decided to finally make a commercial for the Krusty Krab. As a side note, the first scene of the episode shows Mr. Krabs walking his pet worm, who we almost never see outside of this episode and Sandy's Rocket from Season 1. Anyways, we learn that Squidward has been hired to direct the commercial, but Mr. Krabs is horrified by how much money he's spending on it. Does anyone else really want to see what Squidward's commercial would have looked like? I bet it would have been pretty interesting. But anyways, Mr. Krabs fires the entire cast and crew and decides to film the commercial with just him, Squidward, and SpongeBob. We then get the hilarious reveal that Squidward told SpongeBob he could help by burying himself. You can so clearly picture how that conversation panned out. The commercial airs that night, and it's one of the biggest highlights of the episode. It's a perfect parody of those cheesy, low-budget commercials.
Who's there?
Where's that coming from?
Yippee! It's Mr. Krabs!
It's also so funny how Squidward is playing a girl in this scene, even though he clearly isn't even trying with his performance. And if you listen to the dialogue of the commercial, there was no reason for Squidward to play a girl at all. It's like Mr. Krabs was just messing with him. The next morning, SpongeBob thinks an old man recognizes him from the commercial, though really he just mistook him for a cereal box, which is another really funny image. Soon, the supposed fame goes to SpongeBob's head, leading to the true conflict of the episode when he decides to quit being a fry cook. He then tries his hand at singing, leading to one of the funniest moments in the episode, the striped sweater song. It's such a hilariously bad song, it sounds like SpongeBob is just making it up as he goes along. And again, Tom Kenny's singing is really the icing on the cake here.
The best time to wear a striped sweater is all the time. One with a collar, turtleneck, that's the kind.
As the customers become more irate, SpongeBob tries to entertain them more, only to accidentally discover that all they want for him is to fry cook. But of course, SpongeBob doesn't realize this and thinks he's finally hit the big time. This episode isn't quite as joke-heavy as the others, but it still has a really fun premise and quite a few hilarious scenes. We now finally return to Season 2 with Squid on Strike. In my review of Jellyfish Hunter, I talked about how SpongeBob may have radicalized my generation, and this episode is probably the best example of that. Fed up with the Krusty Krab's working conditions, Squidward decides to go on strike. SpongeBob joins him despite not really knowing what a strike is, but it ultimately leads to a very rare instance of SpongeBob getting fired from the Krusty Krab. Most of the episode is Squidward trying to rally everyone against the Krusty Krab, with SpongeBob making things harder with how much he misunderstands the situation. Squidward's dialogue in these scenes are when you realize how much this episode probably radicalized the kids watching it. Even though the episode is kind of poking fun at strikers, the things Squidward says are really solid critiques of capitalism.
The gentle laborer shall no longer suffer from the noxious greed of Mr. Krabs.
Hey, what's that guy talking about?
I don't know, but he's got a megaphone.
Finally, when Mr. Krabs insults Squidward, SpongeBob begins to sort of understand the point of the strike. But in one of the funnier moments of the episode, Squidward realizes that being on strike with SpongeBob for so long would be torturous for him.
Yeah, Squidward. Yeah, Squidward.
At the same time, Mr. Krabs begs Squidward to come back since the new teenage employees keep bugging him, leading to another line my brother and I quote pretty often.
All right, Mr. Krabs!
Meanwhile, SpongeBob excitedly waits at home for the strike to continue, and we hear a snippet of the original song, Hey Mean Mr. Boss Man. If you can, I highly recommend listening to the full song, it's really funny.
Hey mean Mr. Boss Man, I'm quitting this here job.
Anyway, SpongeBob takes Squidward's ideas a little too far by completely destroying the Krusty Krab. And just as Mr. Krabs is about to accept Squidward's terms, he's so infuriated by what he finds that he makes SpongeBob and Squidward work there forever. The episode ends on a funny and also kind of depressing shot of SpongeBob and Squidward's skeletons still working at the restaurant. In a way, this kind of foreshadowed how Nickelodeon would just keep milking SpongeBob for all it's worth, which they still do even today. So Squid on Strike is another episode that is both hilarious and surprisingly poignant. At number 15, we have the infamous Sailor Mouth. How come Midlife Crustacean got banned but this one is still widely available? But in all seriousness, this is the episode when SpongeBob and Patrick swear up a storm. Only the swears are censored by dolphin noises.
Hey, Patrick, how the are ya?
You'd think that the voice actors would actually be saying nonsense swear words, and that was the original plan, but according to Tom Kenny, the actors found this so difficult that they decided to just swear for real. Some bits of this uncensored audio were recently leaked, but I would give anything to hear the full thing. The events of the episode kick off when SpongeBob and Patrick discover a swear word written on a dumpster, only they don't realize it's a swear. This also leads to a funny moment when Patrick thinks the word SpongeBob is pointing out as crabs.
Crabs. Isn't that the red sweaty guy you work for?
The next day, SpongeBob and Patrick use the word non-stop, and everyone's reactions to it are pretty funny. Mr. Krabs then informs them that it's actually the 11th bad word, and SpongeBob and Patrick promise to never say it again. In the next scene, we see them playing the game Eels and Escalators, which was later made into a real board game, and of course I have it. This is probably the funniest scene in the episode with how SpongeBob keeps getting screwed over in the game.
Escalators!
Eels.
SpongeBob gets so frustrated that he lets out number 11, leading Patrick to try and tell Mr. Krabs on him before accidentally saying it himself. When Mr. Krabs finds out, he decides to punish them, leading to a really dark line that took me way too long to get.
We'll probably get 40 lashes.
Oh no!
But before the punishment can begin, Mr. Krabs lets out a string of curse words. And once again, I would pay good money to hear the uncensored audio.
Can't you see I got a foot here?
Finally, Mr. Krabs' mom finds out about all this, and I think this was actually her first appearance in the entire series. They end up having to paint her house as punishment. This is just a really fun episode with a somewhat risque theme, but it never goes too adult. Now let's look at the Season 3 premiere episode, The Algae's Always Greener. The idea behind the episode is just so genius, and the writers take full advantage of it. The episode is about how Plankton becomes jealous of Mr. Krabs' life and decides to trade places with him. As you'd expect, it isn't exactly all it's cracked up to be. But the extent to how much Plankton suffers here is just so funny. Everyone is just acting completely crazy, especially SpongeBob, who tries desperately to impress Plankton. When Plankton gives SpongeBob a mild criticism, we end up getting one of my favorite facial expressions SpongeBob has ever made.
What? matter with you? All I said was a little too much sauce. It's no big deal, really.
Eventually, Plankton decides to shut him up by giving him a promotion, which leads to Squidward being demoted to a fry cook. This gives us one of my favorite scenes, which has become a pretty popular meme, in which Plankton reacts to the disgusting patty Squidward made.
Well, Mr. Funny Man, is this how you get your sick kicks?
What? It's just an ordinary Krabby. Oh my goodness! Squidward!
The whole exchange and Plankton's actual reaction are just pure gold. Things get more and more hectic, culminating in Mr. Krabs coming in completely naked to try and steal the formula. Once he's defeated, we get another hilarious moment with everyone's victory screech, which just comes out of nowhere and always makes me crack up.
Victory screech!
Finally, Plankton decides he can't take it and goes back to his own dimension, happily eating his holographic meatloaf. Not much else to say, this is just a hilarious episode with a hilarious premise. I've been saying hilarious a lot, haven't I? I need to come up with some better adjectives. Up next is Shanghai from Season 2. Out of all the classic episodes, this one has probably the most complicated history. It originally aired as a double-length special, but in subsequent releases it was paired up with Gary Takes a Bath. This was because the episode was actually part of a contest Nickelodeon held called You Wish, which I'll go more in detail about later on. First, let's look at the episode itself, which sees SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward accidentally coming across the Flying Dutchman's ship. Specifically, its anchor lands in their neighborhood, leading SpongeBob and Patrick to mistakenly believe that Sky had a baby, which in itself is just a really funny phrase.
Squidward! The Sky had a baby from my cereal box!
The two climb up the anchor and board the ship, meeting the pirate ghost himself. Almost immediately, Squidward gets set on fire by the Dutchman over and over again, which starts with a really funny moment when the Dutchman thinks Squidward insulted his mother.
Insulting a man's ship be worse than insulting his mother.
No, wait, it was his mother you said was dirty, not his ship.
And in another really funny scene, the Dutchman ends up sending Squidward into a portal full of random, surreal images, which is already some funny imagery, but once again, Roger Bumpus' delivery right before and during the portal just make it so much better.
Oh, now what? I suppose you're gonna show me. Oh, gee, that's very nice. Oh, what is this? Some kind of magic act?
Afterwards, the Dutchman recruits SpongeBob and Patrick to become first mates on his ship, leading to some of the highlights of the episode as they try unsuccessfully to scare people. Seriously, this is another episode where there are just too many hilarious scenes to count. My favorite might be when Patrick does his haunting screech, which was actually based on noises his voice actor Bill Falkenbach would make his vocal warm-ups.
That'll do.
After their constant failures, the Dutchman finally decides to just eat them. And in another one of the most memorable scenes, SpongeBob and Patrick try to escape through the perfume department. This just comes out of nowhere and really adds nothing to the plot, but it's so funny that I just don't care. Once they fail to escape, the Dutchman offers them 3 wishes instead of eating them. And we get another hilariously stupid scene where Patrick tries to negotiate with them.
Make it 5.
4.
3. Take it or leave it.
Okay. 3.
Patrick wastes the first wish by accidentally wishing that they knew about them earlier, and SpongeBob accidentally uses his to bring Squidward back. Now, this is where the You Wish contest came in. Viewers would call a number or go to a website and vote for whether SpongeBob, Patrick, or Squidward would get the last wish. Of course, SpongeBob ended up winning, but they still show the other wishes at the end. SpongeBob wishes that the Dutchman was a vegetarian, but they also end up turning into fruits. Yep, that's how the episode ends. I was really little when this episode first aired, so I don't remember the whole contest thing. I'm more used to the version in subsequent reruns and most home media releases, in which the patchy segments were edited to remove any reference to the contest. This unfortunately leads to some awkward cuts in these segments, and we don't get to see the other endings.
Call in and vote time! You get to choose how our cartoon ends today, via the phone or the internet, if you're technologically inclined. We're gonna see me favorite show, Shanghai! Ta-da!
But if you're curious, all the endings are easily found online. But despite that, this episode is still chock full of great comedy. Now let's move on to what is by far my favorite double-length episode from the classic era, Christmas Who. This is actually quite significant in the history of SpongeBob. It was the first double-length episode, the first of several Christmas specials, and it was the very first appearance of Patchy the Pirate. This is not only my favorite SpongeBob special, but it's also up there as just one of my favorite Christmas specials in general. Ever since it first aired, it's basically a tradition for me and my siblings to watch this at least once a year during the holidays. Because of that, this is quite possibly the SpongeBob episode I've seen the most amount of times, and I never get tired of it. The episode starts when SpongeBob visits Sandy, only to discover her putting up Christmas lights. This part is also where the episode's title comes from.
Christmas who?
Sandy then tells SpongeBob all about Christmas. What's funny is that instead of dialogue, we just hear Patchy's narration describing it. And at the same time, Sandy just does all of these insane random things. Apparently the writers did this because the original scene was just too boring, and they definitely fixed that issue, as this part always cracks me up. Afterwards, SpongeBob tells Patrick, Squidward, and Mr. Krabs about Christmas, and they all start working on their letters for Santa. One of my favorite gags is when we see Patrick not being able to use a pencil. It's just such a funny image.
Dear Santa. Oh, not again.
Next, we see a montage of everyone getting ready for Christmas, except for Squidward, who finds the whole thing stupid. This is where we get the original song, The Very First Christmas, an insanely catchy Beach Boy style song. In fact, it sort of sounds like a mix between Wouldn't It Be Nice and Little Saint Nick.
This Christmas feels like the very first Christmas to me.
After the song, everyone eagerly awaits for Santa, but he ends up not coming. For some reason, my brother and I find ourselves quoting this line a lot.
Hey, where's Santa?
Everyone leaves SpongeBob in disappointment, and in one of the cruelest yet funniest moments in the special, Squidward comes out and gloats to SpongeBob about Santa not coming. I just love SpongeBob's face when Squidward takes his picture, and Tom Kenny's delivery on this line.
I made it for you so you wouldn't feel left out when Santa came.
After SpongeBob gives Squidward a handmade clarinet as a present, Squidward starts to feel bad and pretends to be Santa in order to cheer SpongeBob up. It's pretty funny and very in character of SpongeBob to not recognize Squidward despite the fact that he doesn't even disguise his voice. But Squidward's gesture starts to snowball as everyone in Bikini Bottom starts asking him for presents, leading Squidward to give up everything in his house. Again, how does everyone not put together that all of these presents are coming straight from Squidward's house? You know what, I won't question it, that just makes it funnier. After his good deed, Squidward gets a thank you letter from Santa Claus, and we actually get to see a live-action Santa played by animator Mike Bell. His performance starts out fairly normal, but quickly escalates into full-blown insanity, making for a hilarious ending. But before I wrap this discussion up, let's talk about the Patchy segments. For Patchy's first appearance in the series, he left a great first impression. Every single scene with him is just hilarious. My favorite gags include the part where we see Potty's puppeteer.
Oh, sir, my fine feathered little neck paint.
And this joke with the fan letter, which I find myself thinking about all the time.
Sincerely yours.
Name and address withheld.
To me, this is the perfect SpongeBob episode to watch around the holidays. Unlike the other double-length episodes, which often feel too long and usually aren't as funny as the regular episodes, this one is packed with hilarious jokes and a heartwarming story. Exactly what you want from a Christmas special. I look forward to watching it every year.
You said number 11.
At number 11, we have Krabby Land. This is another candidate for the SpongeBob episode I've seen the most times. Not only because I love it so much, but back when I was in school, I had a tradition to watch this episode, along with another one we'll be looking at later, on the first day of summer vacation. That's because the episode literally starts out on the first day of summer, which SpongeBob is really excited for. I love the whole springtime caroling bit here.
Walking in the grass, it's so fine, don't need shoes in the summertime.
Mr. Krabs is excited too, but little does SpongeBob know that the only reason he's excited is because all the kids will get out of school and come to the Krusty Krab to spend their money. But his plans get foiled when he discovers that a playground has opened up right by the Krusty Krab, stealing all his customers. So the next day, Mr. Krabs decides to build his own amusement park called Krabby Land. The park itself is an obvious parody of Disneyland, But the tagline Mr. Krabs gives it is actually reminiscent to that of Chuck E. Cheese.
It's Krabby Land, where a kid can have fun.
Chuck E. Cheese, where a kid can be a kid.
Mr. Krabs unveils the park to the kids, and in one of the funnier moments of the episode, we see that the whole thing is cheaply thrown together. But Mr. Krabs promises the kids that they'll get a visit from Krabby the Clown, an obvious parody of Ronald McDonald. Meanwhile, SpongeBob has to stall the kids by dressing up as
the Krabby Patty burglar,
which again is clearly inspired by the Hamburglar. The kids are bored by him at first, until SpongeBob discovers that they're entertained when he gets hurt. What we get next is some brutal but really funny physical comedy. It is kind of sad seeing SpongeBob maim himself like this, but again, it's so funny that I don't really care. It's especially funny when SpongeBob calls the two really buff guys to torture him even more. Eventually, SpongeBob decides he's had enough and calls on Mr. Krabs to bring in Krabby the Clown. After hyping it up, we get the very funny reveal that Krabby is just Mr. Krabs with a blue nose, made out of a spray-painted tomato, and a goofy tie. SpongeBob comes in to tell him off, and we get probably the most memorable line in the episode.
You promised these children Krabby the Clown, but all I saw out there was Jiffy the Cheapskate.
Mr. Krabs tries to explain his point of view, and this is probably the slimiest we've ever seen Mr. Krabs, showing that he cares more about money than the children. Again, this episode really taught us about the dangers of capitalism.
The children? I don't care about the children. I just care about their parents' money. The fact that their feeble minds are easily manipulated by cheap playgrounds and talentless clowns is no skin off my nose. Survival of the fittest, SpongeBob! Survival of the fittest!
But of course the kids overhear him and get their revenge, which is a satisfying ending to a really funny episode. It is a bit depressing at times, seeing as how low Mr. Krabs will get for a quick buck, but the hilarious moments more than make up for it. It always gets me in the summer mood.
And he makes 10! I think.
Alright, this is it. We have officially entered the top 10. And we're kicking it off with Can You Spare a Dime from Season 3. Like Missing Identity, I feel this episode tends to get overlooked when discussing the best of SpongeBob. For one thing, the episode answers one of the most obvious questions viewers would have. If Squidward hates working at the Krusty Krab so much, why doesn't he just quit? Well, he does just that at the beginning of this episode, spurred by Mr. Krabs accusing him of stealing the first dime he ever made. Mr. Krabs' interrogation of Squidward is so hilarious, and sets up one of the funniest running themes in the episode, which is that Squidward just can't take a hint.
Are you accusing me of something?
Well, the way I see it, there are three possibilities. 1, you stole it. 2, you stole it. Or 3, you stole it!
After Squidward quits, SpongeBob tries to reason with him, and just in this brief scene we get all sorts of funny gags.
'Cause you and me, we're like brothers, only closer.
We also get possibly the funniest smash cut in the whole series, which shows that after quitting his job, Squidward lost his home and all of his possessions. As usual, this scene takes the idea to the funniest extreme.
Even your paintings?
Nobody would take them, so I had to eat them!
Now we know why Squidward can't just quit the Krusty Krab. It would be nearly impossible for him to get another job. Once SpongeBob finds Squidward in this state, he offers to let Squidward live with him for a while. At first the arrangement seems to be working out fine, but then we get to the main conflict of the episode, which is Squidward becoming way too bossy towards SpongeBob. It also features maybe my favorite narrator moment in the whole series.
So much later that the old narrator got tired of waiting, and they had to hire a new one.
On the one hand, it's really funny seeing Squidward going from being really appreciative of SpongeBob to treating him so cruelly, including making him dress up in a maid's outfit.
And why aren't you in uniform?
But on the other hand, it's kind of depressing since there are people who really act like this. Fed up with Squidward, SpongeBob decides to not so subtly talk him into getting a job. Again, it's just so funny how oblivious Squidward is to SpongeBob's attempts despite making it blatantly obvious what he's trying to get across. Specifically, the whole puppet show and the TV bit has always stuck with me ever since I was a kid.
Thanks. I'm gonna go look for one so I can stop mooching off my friends and they can get back to their lives.
Once it becomes obvious that Squidward won't take the hint, SpongeBob finally breaks down and tells Mr. Krabs off for not hiring Squidward back. We don't usually get scenes like this of SpongeBob losing his temper at anyone, especially Mr. Krabs, and that makes this scene all the funnier.
Listen, you crustaceous cheapskate! Squidward's been living at my house, driving me crazy, and you're not gonna hire him back all because of a stupid dime!
But then it turns out that Mr. Krabs' dime was in his pants the whole time. And not only that, but it is huge. Seriously, how did Mr. Krabs lose that thing in the first place? Squidward gets his job back, but we end with the callback to the first scene where Mr. Krabs accuses Squidward of putting the dime in his pants.
Well, the way I see it, there are three possibilities. 1, you put the dime in me pants. 2, you put the dime in me pants. Or 3, you put the dime in me pants.
Once again, my brother and I quote the last line from Mr. Krabs all the time. This episode is in my top 10 for a reason. It has a brilliant concept and equally brilliant comedy. At number 9, we have what is by far my favorite episode from Season 1, Pizza Delivery. I consider this to be the first truly great episode of SpongeBob. All the episodes before this are still really good, but this is the first episode when you realize that this show is truly something special. As the title suggests, Mr. Krabs decides to start delivering pizza from the Krusty Krab, and sends SpongeBob and Squidward to deliver the first one. As usual, SpongeBob is way more excited about this than Squidward, who cares so little about the delivery that he makes the unwise decision to let SpongeBob drive the delivery boat. This episode actually directly follows boating school, so the show had only recently established that SpongeBob was a bad driver. As you'd expect, SpongeBob loses control of the boat and causes him and Squidward to get stranded in the middle of nowhere. What follows is one of the best explorations of SpongeBob and Squidward's relationship in the whole series. Because the area around them is so desolate, and they only have the simple task of delivering a pizza, the episode really has to focus on SpongeBob and Squidward's personalities to carry the story, and the writing does so brilliantly. Every interaction between SpongeBob and Squidward is hilarious, whether it's SpongeBob trying to lead them in a hitchhiking dance, Squidward trying to talk SpongeBob into eating the pizza with him,
Sure is a fine-looking pizza.
Yeah.
What's that? Is that the cheese?
Yeah.
And the pepperoni?
Yeah.
Oh, looks good, huh?
or SpongeBob's little song that to this day always pops in my head when someone brings pizza over.
The Krusty Krab pizza is the pizza for you and me.
This episode has some of the strongest character writing in the whole series. This type of humor can be really tricky to pull off if you don't have strong enough characters, but clearly the classic SpongeBob episodes did. Finally, SpongeBob and Squidward manage to make it to the customer who ordered the pizza. But when he discovers that SpongeBob forgot his drink, he yells at him, refuses the pizza, and ends up making SpongeBob cry. This leads to the first time in the whole series, and one of the few times in general, when Squidward seems to actually care about SpongeBob and finally sticks up for him. He does this by taking the pizza and throwing it at the customer's face, which is always so cathartic to watch. I bet tons of people in food service wish they could do this. Pizza delivery is truly something special. It's funny, well written, and even emotionally effective. It's everything you could possibly want in classic SpongeBob. Up next is another one of my favorite Squidward episodes, Just One Bite. This one starts with the shocking revelation that Squidward has never had a Krabby Patty, and you know what they say?
The only people who don't like a Krabby Patty have never tasted one.
So SpongeBob tries to get Squidward to try a patty despite his refusal to, culminating in one of my favorite facial expressions in the show.
Does this look unsure to you?
No.
Fun fact, in one of my math classes in high school, we had to redraw a picture of our choice using graphs, and I chose Squidward's face here as my drawing. I wish I still had the original drawing so I could show it. Really, this whole episode has some of Squidward's best facial expressions. Seriously, it's absolutely bonkers how many insane faces they could fit into one episode. Anyways, Squidward finally gives in to SpongeBob's persuasion, and while at first he appears to hate the Krabby Patty, as soon as SpongeBob walks away, we learn that he secretly loves it. The rest of the episode is basically Squidward trying to get his hands on a Krabby Patty in any way possible, but it never seems to work out for him. That night, Squidward becomes so obsessed that he has a dream about meeting a giant Krabby Patty. This scene honestly has some disturbing implications, since we literally see Squidward have a child with a patty. I would never be able to get that image out of my head. When Squidward wakes up, he decides he can't take it anymore, so he sneaks into the Krusty Krab to get to the secret patty vault, where apparently they just keep an endless amount of Krabby Patties for no particular reason. Again, it's SpongeBob, don't think about it too hard. But there was actually a scene right before Squidward discovers the vault that's been cut from most reruns and home media releases, in which he comes across a booby trap set up by Mr. Krabs. Supposedly, this scene was cut because the episode aired less than a month after 9/11, since the scene contains a bunch of fire and explosions. But in all likelihood, it was probably just cut for time. And honestly, I don't think the episode is missing much without the scene. It is pretty funny, but it does go on for a bit too long. Anyways, before Squidward can get into the vault, SpongeBob suddenly shows up for his nightly patty inspection. SpongeBob's face when he realizes that Squidward loves Krabby Patties is another one of my favorite images in the whole show.
You like Krabby Patties, don't you, Squidward?
Finally, Squidward can't hide it anymore and just goes ham on all the patties in the vault. SpongeBob warns Squidward not to eat too much at once, and well, this happens.
What's gonna happen? Am I gonna blow up?
No, worse! It'll go right to your thighs!
My thighs?
And then you'll blow up!
Really, this is a pretty good message for kids not to eat too much fast food, even if it's done in a cartoony fashion. But either way, it's the perfect way to end one of the funniest episodes in the show. Now let's take a look at Dying for Pie. This is the last episode that was featured on the Sponge Buddies VHS, and it's easily my favorite of the bunch. It also happens to be my older brother's all-time favorite SpongeBob episode, and it's easy to see why. This honestly has some of the best dark comedy in the entire show. It begins when Mr. Krabs announces the new Employee Brotherhood Day, in which SpongeBob and Squidward have to give each other gifts. SpongeBob gives Squidward a sweater made out of his own eyelashes, and afterward we already get a taste of some of the dark humor this episode will serve us.
Is this any better, Squidward? I made this one with my tears!
Squidward reluctantly agrees to give SpongeBob a gift, but the only catch is that he has to make it himself. Suddenly, Squidward comes across a group of pirates carrying what he thinks are homemade pies, and we get one of my favorite lines in the episode.
Oh, these aren't homemade, they were made in a factory. A bomb factory. They're bombs.
Not realizing that they're actually bombs, Squidward buys one for SpongeBob and pretends that he made it himself. But when he presents it to Mr. Krabs, they discover what it really is before SpongeBob eats the whole thing. Mr. Krabs' line here is another one my siblings and I quote constantly.
You had to kill him. The boy cries, you sweat her of tears, and you kill him. How are you gonna live with yourself?
This is when the dark premise of the episode really sets in, as Mr. Krabs reveals that SpongeBob only has sunset before the bomb goes off inside him. A guilt-ridden Squidward decides to make this last day the best of SpongeBob's life. It's oddly kind of wholesome seeing Squidward try so hard to be nice to SpongeBob when he normally couldn't care less about him.
And this time, there's gonna be love! So much, he's gonna drown in it! Drown in it!
Note to self. Watch out for Squidward.
SpongeBob ends up bringing up a list of what he would consider to be his best day ever. And most of the entries are hilariously humiliating towards Squidward. I also love how needlessly creepy Squidward's face he makes for the kids is.
Hey kids, check it out! This is my best friend, Squidward!
SpongeBob's final wish is to watch the sunset with Squidward. And once again, we get some really dark jokes about how oblivious SpongeBob is to what's about to happen.
This is great. Just the three of us. You, me, and this brick wall you built between us.
When the sun finally sets, Squidward hears an explosion and assumes it's SpongeBob. And this is probably the darkest scene of the whole episode. I mean, of course the explosion turns out to be something else, but for a hot second we seriously thought that SpongeBob died. Squidward is furious at having to do all those things with SpongeBob for nothing, and we get a great scene of him trying to explain what's going on. One of my favorite moments is SpongeBob trying to explode.
Gary! You are gonna finish your dessert, and you are gonna like it!
And I love Roger Bumpus' delivery in this part.
Because the pie you ate was a bomb!
It turns out that SpongeBob never actually ate the pie and was saving it for him and Squidward. And in true SpongeBob fashion, it ends with Squidward blowing up. Despite how dark this episode can get, I still find myself cracking up at every single joke. And it's yet another episode that gives me an extra feeling of nostalgia. At number 6 is the camping episode. Along with Krabby Land, this is the other episode that I would always watch on the first day of summer. This is one of the more well-known episodes of SpongeBob, and for good reason. Like any great episode, it's just full of non-stop laughs. First of all, I love how the title of the episode is literally just the camping episode. It feels like pretty much every cartoon has to have an episode where the characters go camping, and it seems like the title was poking fun at that. Like the title suggests, SpongeBob and Patrick are going camping, and of course Squidward is thrilled to not have them around for a while. But then we learn that SpongeBob and Patrick's idea of camping is just going right outside their house and setting up a tent. Squidward argues with them about this for a bit, and we get a really funny scene where Squidward basically tricks himself into camping with them.
Okay. Have fun inside.
That's it, I'm in.
The rest of the episode is basically nothing but hilarious bits relating to camping. We get SpongeBob and Patrick pretending to be astronauts while eating marshmallows.
Yummy! Patrick to SpongeBob, the deliciousness has landed!
Squidward trying and failing to set up a tent with some hilarious reactions from SpongeBob and Patrick.
Write that down, write that down!
And of course we have the most memorable part of the episode, the campfire song. This has to be one of the best original songs of the whole show. It was composed by the episode's co-writer, Dan Povenmire, and it's just as good as most of the songs he wrote for Phineas and Ferb.
Let's gather around the campfire and sing our campfire song. Our CAMPFIRESONG song.
But when Squidward tries to play his clarinet, SpongeBob and Patrick warn him about attracting a sea bear. For me, this is the true highlight of the episode. From here on out, the whole plot just gets so absurd that it's absolutely hilarious. Some of my favorite gags include the magazine SpongeBob and Patrick show Squidward.
I married a sea bear.
Yeah, and Fake Science Monthly.
Sea bears and fairy tales are real.
And this line from SpongeBob.
Why, once I met this guy who knew 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 this guy's cousin.
You're right!
After learning what attracts a sea bear, Squidward tries to prove them wrong by doing everything they said not to. This includes wearing a sombrero in a goofy fashion, which I like to think is the same sombrero Squidward pulls out in the Idiot Box episode. Of course, this causes a real sea bear to come out and attack Squidward, and it leads to probably the funniest bit in the whole episode. It's another classic example of the show being ruthless towards Squidward, but in this case he kinda deserves it.
What'd I do that time?
I don't know, I guess he just doesn't like you.
Pretend to be somebody else!
Finally, the three are able to ward off the sea bear by drawing a circle around them in the ground. This little bit with the sea bear always makes me laugh. But just as they think they're safe, they come across a sea rhinoceros, which is attracted by the sound of a sea bear attack. This whole episode is just full of the chaotic energy that SpongeBob does so well. I know it's probably an easy pick to put this high on the list, but I never get tired of this episode.
I always love to count it down. 5! You do the rest, buddy!
Now we're officially entering the top 5 with Wet Painters. This is another perfect example of an episode that's just jam-packed with jokes, and barely any of them are wasted. Like all great SpongeBob episodes, this one has a deceptively simple premise in which Mr. Krabs tasks SpongeBob and Patrick with painting his garage. The only condition is that they can't get paint on anything but the wall, because the paint is permanent, and if they mess up, well... To enter the garage, they discover that the walls are covered in random objects that they could easily get paint on. Mr. Krabs' garage setup is honestly insane. He has the most random items you could possibly have, including a display of dolls and even a vending machine. We then get one of the funniest scenes in the episode, in which SpongeBob accidentally creates a giant paint bubble, and Patrick only makes it worse.
Patrick?
Yeah, SpongeBob?
I don't think this bubble can get much bigger.
Nonsense!
This is another episode where Patrick's stupidity truly shines, and it makes for some of the funniest parts of the episode. And right before the bubble scene, we get another one of my most quoted moments from the show.
Careful, SpongeBob! Careful, SpongeBob! SpongeBob, careful! Careful, SpongeBob! Careful, SpongeBob! Careful, SpongeBob! Careful, SpongeBob!
Patrick, the lid's already off.
Miraculously, when the bubbles pop, they seem to cover the wall without getting on anything, except Mr. Krabs' first honor. This is where the true conflict of the episode kicks in, as SpongeBob and Patrick try desperately to get the paint off, and some of the methods they try are so ridiculous that they're insanely entertaining to watch.
Wait, SpongeBob! We're not cavemen! We have technology!
We also get a rare example of Patrick actually saying something smart, but of course he still screws it up.
I mean, it's not like it looks any different than a regular dollar. Why hang it? You could just stick any old dollar bill up on the wall. No one would even know the difference.
Tom Kenny's voice acting during the vending machine part is just sublime.
Get it back, get it, back it, get it.
When Mr. Krabs gets home, they try their best to hide what they did to his dollar, but Mr. Krabs figures it out. But then it turns out that the paint actually comes off with saliva. And yeah, that's kind of where the episode ends. It's admittedly a little anticlimactic, but I think that just makes it funnier. There's not really much else to say about this episode beyond just stating the funniest moments. But it truly is a blast to watch and will always have me cracking up. At number 4, we have Graveyard Shift. Even though this isn't technically a Halloween episode, this is probably my favorite one to watch during the season, as not only is it way funnier than the actual Halloween episodes, but it has a legitimately spooky feel. In this one, Mr. Krabs comes up with the idea to keep the Krusty Krab open 24 hours a day. When you think about it, Krabs' plan here is pretty messed up. As far as we know, SpongeBob and Squidward are the only 2 employees at the restaurant, so for the Krusty Krab to be open 24/7, they would have to just keep working and never be able to go home. That sounds like it's breaking several labor laws. But SpongeBob of course doesn't care and is, in fact, ecstatic about the idea of working non-stop. SpongeBob's excitement annoys Squidward until he finally tries to mess with him by telling him the story of the hash-slinging slasher. This entire scene is just pure gold, and it might be my favorite part of the whole episode. The writing and Roger Bumpus' delivery make it seem like Squidward is just making all of this up as he goes along, leading to hilarious details like this one.
So now, what day is it?
Tuesday?
Tuesday night!
I also love when that one guy interrupts the story for a few seconds.
First, the lights will flicker on and off. Next...
Dude, can I have some ketchup?
Oh, here you go. Next...
SpongeBob is terrified at first until Squidward reveals that the whole thing was a joke. SpongeBob's screams and laughter here are pretty funny at first, but admittedly can get a little annoying after a while.
SpongeBob, I was just...
Later on, once everyone's left the restaurant, SpongeBob and Squidward are working there alone when Squidward begins to notice the warning signs of the slasher. Squidward's face when he first realizes this always makes me laugh. As does the way he answers the phone.
What? Hello?
We also get an amazing fake out with the third sign.
And the walls will ooze green slime! Oh, wait, they always do that.
SpongeBob thinks Squidward is doing all of this on purpose, even when the bus comes to drop someone else off, leading to another one of my favorite exchanges in the episode.
SpongeBob, there are 2 problems with your theory. 1, I hate you. And 2, how can that be me when I'm standing right here?
But as it turns out, the slasher is just a guy looking for a job at the Krusty Krab. We then get an ending that's so random, so out of nowhere, that it rivals the ending of I Had an Accident. It's another case where the writers clearly had no idea how to end the episode, and that just makes it so much funnier.
Wait! If that was you on the phone and you on the bus, then who was flickering the lights?
Nosferatu!
This was also the first time I had ever heard of Nosferatu, which is probably the case for a lot of people from my generation, and it's now one of my favorite horror movies. It's just too bad that the more recent episodes kind of ruined it by making Nosferatu a recurring character, completely missing the point of what made his first appearance so funny. But this is another hilarious and endlessly quotable episode that always gets me in a bit of a spooky mood. At number 3 is the Krusty Krab training video. This episode has probably the most brilliant premise of the entire classic era of SpongeBob. We're basically watching the in-universe training video for new employees of the Krusty Krab. The aesthetic perfectly captures the feeling of cheesy training videos that were so popular in the 80s and 90s, right down to the synth music. But what really carries the episode is the narrator, who apparently used to narrate real training and educational videos, and you can tell because he perfectly captures that style.
Welcome aboard. If you're watching this video, then let me be the first to say congratulations.
But beyond the amazing concept, we also get plenty of hilarious character moments. You've got Squidward trying to get Patrick to order something.
Is that for here or to go?
SpongeBob asking Mr. Krabs for a raise and immediately getting rejected.
Mr. Krabs, can I have a raise?
No.
Good job, Mr. SquarePants.
And probably my favorite instance of Plankton trying to steal the Krabby Patty formula.
You'll never catch me, Krabs. Not when I shift into maximum overdrive. Hi-ya! I knew I should have gotten the turbo.
We even learn a little bit about the Krusty Krab's origins, including this dark line that just comes out of nowhere.
After the war, Krabs stayed secluded in a deep depression that seemed endless.
The narration also provides some hilarious bits, such as the poop acronym.
People order our patties.
Ah, poop.
And the whole hoopla scene, which I still think of every time I hear that word.
Sounds like a...
But possibly the biggest highlight comes at the very end. Throughout the whole episode, they keep teasing SpongeBob and the audience with the promise of learning the Krabby Patty recipe at the end. When the time comes, they hype it up in the funniest way possible, only for the episode to end like this.
Okay, the secret formula is...
I was pretty little when this episode first aired, so I don't remember what the reactions were to the ending, but I imagine everyone must have been pissed. Or maybe it was like when The Sopranos aired its last episode and a bunch of people thought their cable went out. This episode actually aired a whole 5 years before The Sopranos finale, so you could argue that SpongeBob beat them to the punch. But even outside the hilarious ending, everything else in this episode is just top tier SpongeBob, and I love every second of it. Now we get to another fan favorite, and obviously one of my favorites, chocolate with nuts. While this isn't my #1 favorite, I think this might be the most consistently funny episode of SpongeBob. This is another case of an episode that just throws jokes at you non-stop, and most if not all of them land bullseyes. Right off the bat, we get a hilarious scene when SpongeBob accidentally scares the mailman away. Then we discover that SpongeBob accidentally got Squidward's new issue of Fancy Living Digest. I love SpongeBob and Patrick's metrics for what a rich person looks like.
This guy's so rich, he has a swimming pool in his swimming pool.
This guy's got shoes.
After looking at the magazine, the two decide to become entrepreneurs and start selling chocolate bars. From here on out, the whole episode is almost nothing but gags relating to the different people SpongeBob and Patrick come across in their sales, and every single one is gut-bustingly hilarious. Right away, the very first person they come across has one of the funniest and most iconic jokes in the whole series.
Chocolate? Chocolate! 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 Chocolate!
There's also when the two come to a house and Patrick starts the sale with this.
I love you.
His face combined with the way he delivers the line are just perfect. Another perfect moment is when they meet an old lady, along with her mother, who is a shriveled up rotting fish with a hilarious raspy voice provided by Tom Kenny.
Chocolate. I remember when they first invented chocolate. Sweet, sweet chocolate. I always hated it.
The argument between the two characters almost sounds like it was improvised.
They're selling chocolate. Chocolate? Yeah. What? What are they selling? Chocolate. What? Chocolate. I can't hear you. They're selling chocolate.
They also run into another con man who first tricks them into buying a bunch of carrying bags, and then they end up buying a bunch of his own chocolate when he disguises himself as an injured man. His little monologue here always sticks out to me for how over the top it is.
I was born with glass bones and paper skin. Every morning I break my legs, and every afternoon I break my arms. At night, I lie awake in agony until my heart attacks put me to sleep.
The episode ends in the best way possible. The insane guy they come across at the very beginning finally catches up to them and buys all of their chocolate. SpongeBob and Patrick's reaction is pure gold. With their money, the two rent out a whole restaurant to take Mary and her mom on a double date. Really, what else is there to say about this episode? It's one of the most well-known for a reason. It's jam-packed with laugh-out-loud funny moments, more so than arguably any other episode. It's a true masterpiece of comedy. And now for the moment you've been waiting for. Da 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 My #1 favorite SpongeBob episode of all time is... Yeah, it's Band Geeks. Sorry for being so predictable, but there's a reason why this is considered by many to be the perfect SpongeBob episode. It has everything that makes the series great. I'm sure you already know what it's about, but in case you don't, the episode starts when Squidward gets a call from Squirnium, and this was actually his very first appearance in the whole series. Squirnium brags about how his marching band is playing at the Bubble Bowl, leading Squidward to falsely claim that he has his own band who will play at the same venue. This opening scene alone has some amazingly funny moments, with even the first line hitting it out of the park.
Yeah, we're with the pet hospital down the street, and I understand you have a dying animal on the premises.
Squidward eventually rounds up most of Bikini Bottom for his band, including most of, if not all of the recurring characters. Seriously, this is probably the first time so many characters appeared at once in a single episode, and it remains one of the biggest gathering of characters in the whole series. That alone makes this episode feel extra special and important. Squidward then sets out on the impossible task of teaching all these people how to play instruments, resulting in so many hilarious scenes that there's too many to count. But if I had to list a few favorites, it would be Sandy beating up Patrick, hearing him scream, and then seeing his entire body stuffed in a tuba.
Whoever's the owner of the white sedan, you left your lights on.
Squidward's line here.
Too bad that didn't kill me.
And the iconic is the mayonnaise and instruments scene.
No, Patrick, mayonnaise is not an instrument. Horseradish is not an instrument either.
Eventually, the whole band breaks out into a fight, spurred by Mr. Krabs and a random fish and another really funny exchange that pops in my head all of the time.
What did you say, punk? Big, meaty claws!
After the fight, Squidward is ready to give up on the band, leading SpongeBob to rally everyone to learn a new song to play. SpongeBob's speech is both very funny and legitimately inspiring.
Right! So if we all could just pretend that Squidward was a fireman or some guy in an ambulance, then I'm sure we could all pull together and discover what it truly means to be in a marching band.
Yeah, for the firemen!
Much to Squidward's shock, the band arrives at the Bubble Bowl, and I just love this moment with SpongeBob.
That's his eager face.
Once it's time for the band to perform, Squidward braces for the worst, until we get probably the most iconic scene in the whole show. SpongeBob leads the band in an epic 80s style hard rock ballad called Sweet Victory, which in itself is such an amazing song that would have easily passed as a real 80s song. It's immensely satisfying to see Squidward get what he wants, since he rarely does so in other episodes. Even the animation emphasizes how huge of a moment this is, looking much more cinematic than anything else in the show. This scene has become so iconic that after Steve Hillenburg's death in 2018, fans began campaigning for it to be featured in the halftime show of the next year's Super Bowl. And it actually worked. Well, sort of.
No introduction.
You guys want to hear Sicko Mode?
Maybe it wasn't the epic tribute fans were expecting, but honestly, I'm just happy that the halftime show acknowledged this episode at all. I know it's an obvious pick for #1, but Band Geeks really is the ultimate SpongeBob episode. It's hilarious, heartwarming, epic, and emotionally satisfying all in one. I have no trouble calling it the perfect episode. And now, my friends, we have finally come to the end of this ranking. The fact that people are still talking about these episodes over 20 years after they aired is a testament to how huge of an impact SpongeBob had on pop culture. Hell, why do you think there are so many SpongeBob memes out there? To many, this is more than just a show. It was a part of our childhoods. And true, the show may have had its ups and downs since the first movie, but I think there's a reason the show still survives today, other than Nickelodeon being greedy. These characters resonate with people and speak to important parts of our lives. I think if SpongeBob has any kind of central message, it's that we all need to hold on to a piece of our childhoods. As we get older, it's easy to become like Squidward and have a cynical view of the world. And yet despite all the difficulties in life, SpongeBob manages to have a childlike sense of wonder and optimism. That's something that I think plenty of people need to hang on to. While we should still take on the responsibilities of adulthood the best we can, there's nothing wrong with taking time to appreciate the simpler things in life. Whether it was intentional or not, Steve Hillenburg and the rest of the cast and crew of SpongeBob taught an entire generation this lesson, and for that I'll be eternally grateful. I'm extremely lucky to have SpongeBob in my life, and no matter how old I get, it will always be part of me. I hope there's something in your life that does the same for you. With that, thank you for watching, and please let me know what your own ranking is or if you agree or disagree with any of my points. But as always, try to be respectful. And of course, thank you to Steve Hillenburg, the writers, storyboard artists, voice actors, and everyone else who helped bring these amazing seasons to life.